Chapter 483. The meeting continued and lasted for more than 2 hours, from 2:00 to 4:00 in the afternoon. When Jean-Wan inadvertently raised her hand and rubbed the back of her neck again, Mo Jingshan said coldly, "The meeting is adjourned. Take a break first. We'll continue in an hour." Everyone looked at each other in surprise. From the very beginning, when he learned that he was coming to Shine for a meeting, he had been mentally prepared. It was said that CEO Mo was a workaholic, especially after taking over Shine Group. It was rare for him to be so humane. Usually, important meetings would last for several hours, and they would not be interrupted, let alone given such a long break. Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, Shenmu opened the door of the conference room, but everyone at the conference table still thought they had heard it wrong. Even Deputy Director Chin didn't dare to get up because of Mo Jingshan's cold eyes from time to time. "CEO Mo, are you really going to take a break? If you take a break now, I'm afraid the meeting won't end until 6:00, the secretary standing next to him asked in a low voice. Mo Jingshan didn't speak but got up and left, cold and quiet. Seeing that CEO Mo had left, it was obvious that the meeting was going to be intermission. Everyone instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Those who should get up and go to the bathroom went to the bathroom, those who should drink water drank water, those who should make phone calls made phone calls, and those who should rub their eyes and sit in their original seats rested. Sure enough, people who weren't employees of Shine Group didn't know what the working atmosphere here was like. This was the first time they had a meeting in Mo Jingshan's territory, and they immediately felt the pressure. Even Deputy Director Chin wondered if he had chosen the wrong place. Mo Jingshan was not a person who could be easily offended. When they met in the city, even the provincial and municipal leaders had to give in to him, but CEO Mo was polite to them. Now in the Shine Group, not to mention that he was the leader of the construction bureau, even the other partners and people from the government departments sitting here felt that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly in the meeting. After making sure that Mo Jingshan had left, Deputy Director Chin put on a smile and looked at Jean-Wan, who was about to go out. "CEO G, you must be very tired after a 2-hour meeting. There's nothing to do after an hour's rest. Would you like to go downstairs and have a coffee with me?" Jean-Wan had stood up and turned to look at Deputy Director Chin, who was in his 40s and wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. She calmly avoided his hand that was about to hold her and said with a smile, "A few days ago, when I drove past the first middle school, I saw a very beautiful girl. I heard people say that her father is the Deputy Director of the Construction Bureau. Is she your daughter?" Deputy Director Chen's expression froze. "The person who picked her up outside the school was your wife, right? I really envy you for having such a perfect family, Deputy Director Chin. Not only is your wife beautiful and virtuous, but she also takes your child to school every day. But I heard people say that they rarely see the child's father." Jean-Wan smiled. "If she's really your daughter, I advise you to spend more time with your family and pick up your children from school. No matter how important your work is, it's not as important as your family, don't you think?" Jean-Wan spoke very tactfully, and there was a smile in her eyes. Deputy Director Chin withdrew his hand and nodded awkwardly. Yes, Jean-Wan glanced at him again. Her voice was soft and light as if she was speaking carelessly, but she slapped his face word by word. "I think your wife is very beautiful. She has such a big daughter, but she still looks so young at this age. In my opinion, a woman at her age has a special charm, which young women like us can't compare with. Each has its own merits. When a man is successful in his career, don't always look at young girls. It's better to look at the person next to you." Finally understanding Jean-Wan's warning, Deputy Director Chin felt a little embarrassed and didn't say anything more, but Jean-Wan had already walked out of the conference room. As soon as she went out, Xiaoba leaned over and said beside her, boss, did you notice that before CEO Mo asked someone to adjust the air conditioner, he first saw you start to rub your arms because you were cold, and then he stopped the meeting because he saw you were so tired that you were rubbing your neck? Jin Wan glanced at him calmly. Are you paying attention to the wrong place? Why did I ask you to come here? Xiao Ba pursed her lips and handed the meeting materials to her. I was sitting at the back just now and sorted out the meeting materials. The contents of the meeting for the past 2 hours have also been recorded. I didn't miss anything. As she spoke, she said happily, I just learned that we assistants and subordinates need to go through a simple security check before entering the conference room of the Shine Group, but Special Assistant Shen let me in without checking me. Boss, do we have special treatment here? Jin Wan knocked Xiao Ba on the head with the meeting materials she had just received. Special my ass. Xiao Ba shrank his neck, took the meeting materials aggrievedly, and muttered in a low voice, but Special Assistant Shen didn't treat us as outsiders just now. Jin Wan just walked out as if she didn't hear anything. The break was only an hour, and she had to continue the meeting later. Jin Wan was about to go downstairs and find a milk tea shop to rest with Xiao Ba, when Xiao Ba received a call from her boyfriend, saying that he was nearby and that he would treat Xiao Ba to a French restaurant in the evening. Knowing that Xiao Ba could take a break, he asked her to sit in a nearby park for a while. Jin Wan couldn't bear to disappoint these two young lovers who were so busy with work that they rarely got together, so she gave Xiao Ba a few hours off. She didn't need to come to the meeting later. She would record the contents of the meeting and take it back to the company tomorrow for them to sort out. Xiao Ba ran off with a blissful expression. Jin Wan had no interest in drinking milk tea alone. She took a stack of documents and casually found an empty parlor on this floor to rest. There was a black leather sofa in the parlor, as well as a water dispenser and disposable cups. She poured herself a glass of warm water and then sat on the sofa, rubbing her neck from time to time. Because she was often busy with work when she was in the UK, she couldn't relax after returning to China. Now, as long as she worked or sat for too long, her neck and shoulders would be a little sore. Chapter 484. Jin Wan managed to open her eyes and set an alarm on her cell phone to wake her up in 45 minutes. Then she simply leaned against the sofa and let herself sleep for a while. It was too comfortable to fall asleep. Her original posture of leaning against the back of the sofa gradually changed to a posture of lying on the sofa. Then, she curled her arms under her head like this. When she was picked up by the waist, she just frowned unconsciously, rubbed her face in his arms, and continued to sleep. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes and watched as the woman in his arms rubbed her face against his chest out of habit. His calm expression was gradually mixed with a hint of warmth. When he carried her out of the reception room, there were Shine Group employees passing by in the hallway. However, they spontaneously walked forward with their noses lowered. No one dared to cast a glance at the woman in CEO Mo's arms. Even if they wanted to discuss curiously, they had to wait until CEO Mo was far away before they dared to do so. However, they did not dare to make any noise. When they reached the top floor of the company, the woman was still sleeping. Mo Jingshan carried her to the office. As soon as he pushed the door open, Jin Wan in his arms seemed to finally notice something wrong. She wanted to turn over, but she couldn't. Her closed eyes didn't open, but her eyelashes moved slightly. Her eyes were still closed, and her body was tighter than when she had just fallen asleep. The man carried the woman who had woken up into the office. Feeling that her body was getting stiffer and stiffer, he spat out 3 cold and low words from his thin lips, "Go back to sleep." Even when he put her on the sofa, Jin Wan just kept her flat sleeping position, lying motionless, and didn't open her eyes. Seeing her stiff appearance, Mo Jingshan smiled, adjusted the air conditioning in the office to the right temperature, took off his suit jacket, and covered her with it. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Ji-won lay motionless on the sofa. During this long time, she could hear the man's footsteps towards the desk and the rustling of the documents as he worked. Everything was quiet. Knowing that she was pretending to be asleep, he didn't expose her. When the break of the meeting was over, the secretary knocked on the door. When she came in, she saw Ji-won lying on the sofa with CEO Mo's clothes covering her body. She didn't dare to ask anything or even glance at her, pretending that there was only CEO Mo in the office, saying, "CEO Mo, the people of the construction bureau are waiting in the conference room." Ji-won didn't hear Mo Jingshin's words. She only heard the man's footsteps passing by the sofa and then walking out of the office. When she was sure that he had left, she slowly opened her eyes, slowly sat up, and looked at the CEO Mo, which was very different from 3 years ago. She sat quietly for less than a minute, then got up and left with a calm look. The secretary had just returned to the secretary's office when she saw Ji-won come out. She hurriedly walked out. "CEO Mo, CEO G," she said, "CEO G, Mo, to you. CEO Mo, G, Mo, you, to okay. I'm going back to the company." Ji-won didn't look at the secretary and went straight to the elevator. "But CEO Mo is still in a meeting. If you want to go back to the company, shouldn't you tell him first? Otherwise." Ji-won stopped in front of the elevator and pressed the down button. "I have nothing to do with your CEO Mo. I don't need to tell him whether I'm leaving or not. Of course, out of politeness, you can say goodbye to him for me after the meeting. But CEO G." Before the secretary finished speaking, the elevator door opened on the top floor, and Ji-won walked in without looking back. Before the elevator door closed, Ji-won took a look at the secretary and said, "Please make a copy of the meeting materials for the second half of today and send them to my assistant's email tomorrow." "Thank you." As soon as she finished speaking, the elevator door closed. 2 hours later, the meeting was over. The secretary had been waiting outside the conference room. Seeing Mo Jingshin come out, she hurried to greet him. Mo Jingshin glanced coldly at the secretary who suddenly came up to greet him. "Is she gone?" The secretary nodded. "As soon as you left the office, CEO G came out." After all, this new secretary had just come to the company. Although she knew CEO Mo's work habits, she didn't know CEO Mo's private life and love life. At this time, she didn't know how to deal with this matter, so she could only say truthfully, "CEO G didn't say anything when she left. She just asked me to make a copy of the meeting materials for the second half of the meeting to her." Hearing this, Mo Jingshin didn't say anything. The secretary hesitated for a long time, not knowing whether to say it or not. But when she thought that when CEO G was lying in the office just now, she seemed to be covered with CEO Mo's coat, and what she saw when she went downstairs, she couldn't help feeling a little indignant. The secretary said hesitantly, "Also, when CEO G left, I saw that the car that picked her up was not the car of MN Group but the car of Mr. Vince, the general manager of BGY Group, and the person who picked her up was also Mr. Vince." Mo Jingshin, who was about to walk forward, suddenly stopped and took a dark look at the secretary. In an instant, the secretary felt as if she had been pierced by an ice arrow, as if there was a thorn in her back. For a moment, she wondered if she had said something wrong. Outside the window at the end of the corridor, it was already dark. High City was just beginning to light, but it was drizzling. The man stood in front of the conference room. His usual indifference was no longer there, and his cold face revealed displeasure. Mo Jingshin was silent for a long time, and then his cold and deep voice suddenly rang. How long had that car been waiting outside before she left? According to the security guard at the door, Mr. Vince's car had been waiting for more than an hour. Our company has had a lot of cooperation with BGY Group before, and we have had many contacts with Mr. Vince, so I have a deep impression of his car. And when the car door opened, I saw the person in the driver's seat, and it was indeed Mr. Vince. Mo Jingshan nodded silently, only listening, but not responding. Seeing that he didn't speak, the secretary didn't dare to say more, let alone guess what the relationship between CEO Mo and CEO G was. CEO Mo was a man with deep thoughts, and it was difficult to understand. Although he had been in the company for so long, he had never seen through him. It was just that her instincts told her that a cold and indifferent person like CEO Mo should have his own control over everything. He would rarely miscalculate. That CEO G should be a very special existence to CEO Mo, right? Chapter 485. Outside the car window, the light rain gradually turned into heavy rain, falling on the car and making muffled noises from time to time, making people's hearts wet. I guess I have to thank the rain. Otherwise, since the last time we parted, I don't know when you would talk to me. Mr. Vince laughed as he drove. Jean Wan sat quietly in the car and smiled. When she left the office building of Shine Group, she was supposed to take a taxi back to the company, but she didn't expect that Mr. Vince's car was waiting for her outside. At that time, the sky was covered with dark clouds, and it was going to rain. She didn't bring an umbrella, nor did she drive her own car. At that time, it was still the rush hour, and it was difficult to get a taxi. Mr. Vince opened the door for her to get in the car, and she didn't refuse but got in. Not long after she got in the car, it began to rain. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Tomorrow is the weekend. I wanted to ask you out, but I was afraid that you were still angry, so I called Xiaoba just now. She said you were here, and I happened to be working nearby, so I came directly. Have you been waiting for a long time?" Mr. Vince didn't answer, but judging from where he had parked and the other cars around, he must have been waiting for her downstairs for a long time. He had been waiting for more than a little time. 3 years, it was indeed a long time. In fact, you don't have to hang on to me all the time. Jean Wan curved her lips and said with a smile, "I can't deny that Mr. Vince is charming enough to attract many women, but my emotional world is already a pool of stagnant water. It's not worth it for you to waste your time on me." Mr. Vince just smiled and shook his head. "You should have heard that I don't want to marry. Now there's just a girl who I'm attracted to. I won't force her. What happened last time was just a momentary loss of control. I'm sorry. I promise I won't be so rude again." In fact, he only kissed her on the cheek that day, but obviously he had said a lot of words of self-reproach. "You don't have to apologize. I've long forgotten it. Let's move on. Don't mention it again." Hearing her words, he naturally wouldn't mention it again. "I heard that your company has been in contact with Shine Group recently. Why are you having meetings in Shine now?" As Mr. Vince spoke, he held the steering wheel with one hand and took out an exquisite pink candy box embellished with sequins from the glove compartment in the car with the other and handed it to her. Jean Wan took a look at it, took it, and replied, "It's a document issued by the government, asking MN and Shine to participate in the stadium reconstruction project together. The venue of the final meeting was decided by the leaders of the construction bureau. I'm just following orders. I've just returned to China, and if I want to establish a foothold in High City, I can't afford to offend anyone, so I have to listen to orders. You sound like you don't want to go to Shine Group." Jean Wan fiddled with the candy box in her hand, opened it, and took a look at it. Instead of answering his question, she just asked, "What gift is this?" "My colleagues went on a business trip to Japan a few days ago and brought back all kinds of souvenirs. I only took this box of fruit candy and left it in the car. I plan to let you eat one every time you take a ride in my car. There are 100 candies inside. If you take my car 100 more times, maybe before you finish eating the candy, you'll already be mine, Mr. Vince said as he gave her a seemingly joking look. Jean Wand picked up a candy from the box, peeled off the wrapper, and threw the pink heart-shaped fruit candy into her mouth. I can't accept other gifts, but this candy looks beautiful and tastes sweet, so I'll accept it. It's impossible to put it in your car. Since you've given it to me, I'll take it away. Jean Wand said and put the candy box into her bag. Mr. Vince didn't stop her. He smiled as if he had gotten what he wanted. It's rare for you to receive something from me. I've never heard that you like sweets before. It seems that I don't know you well enough. I don't like sweets very much, but I don't mind eating them. Everyone likes beautiful things. When I'm in a bad mood, eating one can restore half of my good mood. Why are you in a bad mood? Jean Wand was silent for a moment, looking at the rain that was getting heavier and heavier outside the car, and didn't answer. Before Xia Tian went home to give birth, she had a deep conversation with Jean Wand. Xia Tian asked Jean Wand if she hated Mo Jingshan very much when she got divorced. Otherwise, why would she leave him so decisively? If it weren't for the fact that Xia Tian was about to give birth, she wouldn't even have come back. Jean Wand said that when she left him 3 years ago, she did hate him. True grief wasn't as heart-wrenching and suicidal as others thought. Instead, it was calmness. Even if one really had a heart-wrenching experience, one wouldn't scream it out. Once one was in so much pain that one would become numb to it. From then on, no matter how one walked down the road, they would always be alone. 3 years was enough for her heart to be strong enough, and it was enough for her to bear all the negative emotions with a calm appearance. She asked Xia Tian, "Have you ever heard of the saying, a smile forgets all enmity?" What Mo Jingshan had done 3 years ago was to remove her from their marriage and seal off all her once lively feelings step by step. The most ruthless thing he had done was to take back all the happiness he had given her with his own hands. So, even if they met again 3 years later, she could smile at him and call him CEO Mo. She could be strangers to him and they could even sit in the same meeting room to work. He was just a man in the business world that she could not afford to offend. He was not the person who once belonged to her. There were not so many rules in life. Everyone lived in this world, and living too extreme would lose the joy of living. So she didn't choose extreme rejection but chose to get along with him tactfully. But she still couldn't figure out why Mo Jingshan kept pressing on her after returning home. It couldn't be that she really didn't know Mo Jingshan at all. Did he just like to play cat and mouse? Even now, every time the man looked at her, his eyes seemed to have the words, "Take back the lost ground." Thinking of the scene where she was going to have a good sleep just now, she was overbearingly carried into the office by that man. He knew she was pretending to be asleep but didn't expose her. She had to keep a stiff sleeping posture awkwardly, and now she still felt sore all over. She always felt that she had brought this upon herself. Chapter 486. When the car arrived at Jean Wand's place, the rain had stopped, and the ground was covered with puddles of water. She would be covered in mud with just a few steps, and it was really inconvenient to go to the road, so Jean Wand simply found a small restaurant on the night market near the apartment and invited Mr. Vince for dinner. Although it was a very simple restaurant, the environment was clean, the ingredients were clean, and the taste was warm and simple. Xiao Ba said before that you can cook and often make dinner at home. I wonder if I can have a chance to taste your cooking in the future. Mr. Vince looked at her gently. It was not the first time that he had eaten with Jean Wand, but every time, he put down the tableware early and watched her eat attentively. Jean Wand held her forehead and sighed with a smile. My cooking skills can only fool Xiao Ba and the others, or feed myself. It's not good at all. Don't take her words seriously. But why do I remember that Xiao Ba said that your cooking is very delicious? When she was in England, she often went to your place to eat. She also said that if she hadn't found a boyfriend and had to move to another place, she would love to be by your side every day and be fed well by you. Speaking of which, Xiao Ba is just an assistant. You can treat her so well, but why do you treat me like an outsider? Jean Wan picked up the glass and took a sip of water. She swallowed and said, "You're right. I've been so good to Xiao Ba, but she's still so talkative and says everything. It seems that I really can't be too good to her in the future. If she knows me too well, she won't even know when she betrays me." She paused and then said, "But she has been working for me for a long time. We've known each other for more than 3 years, and we're as familiar as family. There's really nothing to treat me like an outsider." "Then I've known you for more than 3 years, haven't I? Xiao Ba can often go to your place to eat, but I can't even eat a meal." Jean Wan, Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. He did not press her, but he clearly had no intention of giving in. In the end, the conversation inexplicably became that Jean Wan owed him a meal. After the meal, Jean Wan prepared to go home. Mr. Vince was about to send her, but he remembered that his phone was still in the car and asked her to wait for a while. Jean Wan said no, asking him to drive back, and turned into the apartment. Perhaps because of a short circuit, the streetlights in the neighborhood went out again. The road from the gate to her home was so dark that she could hardly see her fingers. The ground was covered in water. Jean Wan walked carefully in her high heels. All of a sudden, her cell phone rang. She had just dug out her phone from her bag and saw that it was a call from the company. She was about to pick it up when she suddenly smelled an unpleasant stench and the stench of alcohol coming from behind her. She paused and her eyes widened. She quickly turned around to avoid the drunkard who was pouncing on her. The other party missed and staggered, almost falling to the ground. His mouth began to clamor, "Wifey, wifey, you're finally back. Why are you hiding?" To be called wifey by this short, fat, sweaty, and alcoholic man, Jean Wan shuddered and took a step back to prevent him from pouncing on her again. "Wifey, come home with me. What else does that man have aside from some stinky money? How can he love you as much as I love you? Come home with me." The drunkard stared at her, speaking crazily as he pounced on her again. Jean Wan dodged again. She was about to turn and quickly return to the entrance to call the security guard when the drunkard used all his strength to grab her hand and pull her back harshly. Jean Wan was almost thrown into his embrace by this forceful tug. With great difficulty, she moved back a little and shouted angrily, "You've mistaken me for someone else. Let go of me. Don't think that I won't recognize you just because you found a rich man and are dressed so beautifully. Wifey, come home with me." Jean Wan was about to push him away harshly. However, just as she raised her foot and was about to stomp on his foot, a black shadow suddenly rushed over and punched the drunkard's face. The drunkard took several steps back and fell heavily to the ground. Jean Wan's eyes lit up. Jean Wan's eyes lit up. Jean Wan was startled. She turned to see that it was Mr. Vince who had rushed over and pinned the man to the ground. After punching the drunkard again, Mr. Vince stood up and grabbed Jean Wan's wrist. He asked with a serious and concerned expression, "Are you all right?" Jean Wan shook her head. She wanted to say that she was fine. In fact, it should not be much of a problem for her to deal with a drunkard like this. However, she did not expect Mr. Vince to suddenly rush over. Mr. Vince's expression was ugly. He was about to bring her to the security guard of the condominium to settle the score. They actually allowed such a person in. However, the drunkard who had fallen to the ground suddenly stood up and cursed, shouting, "Damn it! Bitch! This old man treated you so well, yet you still ran off with a rich man. I'll kill you." As he spoke, he suddenly pulled out a fruit knife from his pocket. His eyes were bloodshot as he charged forward. By the time the two of them realized that this drunkard who had suddenly appeared was actually carrying a knife, there was already a flash of silver light. Jean Wan's heart jumped fiercely as she rushed to shout, "Careful!" Mr. Vince's eyes were sharp and his hands were nimble. He pulled Jean Wan to the other side of his body, protecting her while instinctively raising his arm to avoid the drunkard's fruit knife. However, the knife ruthlessly slashed across his arm, leaving a bloody wound. The drunkard's eyes were bloodshot as he raised the knife to stab down again. At this moment, the security guards had already heard the commotion. 3 or 4 of them rushed over and pressed the drunkard onto the ground. The drunkard continued to curse but was unable to stand up. Jean Wan rushed to grab Mr. Vince's arm. She pursed her lips and said, "Using your arm to block, do you think you're an iron wall? Come home with me. I'll help you wash your wound." Mr. Vince originally wanted to say that it was only a fruit knife wound and that it was nothing serious. However, when he heard that Jean Wan actually allowed him to go to her home, the words on the tip of his tongue turned into obediently nodding his head. "All right." In that instant, even if the security guards did not arrive in time, the 2 bodyguards hidden in the shadows would have rushed over. They did not expect Mr. Vince to actually turn back. On the other side, Mo Jingshan had yet to leave the office when he heard a low and apprehensive voice reporting from the phone. When Miss G just returned home, she met a crazy drunkard downstairs. Mr. Vince suffered some superficial injuries as a result. Right now, Miss G has already helped Mr. Vince back to her home. The man had yet to leave the office. His handsome face was hidden in the darkness of the rainy night. His fingers tightened around the phone. So, not only did Jean Wan have dinner with that person tonight, she also brought that man who clearly had designs on her back to her place. Dash. Chapter 487. The door opened with a beep. Jean Wan rushed to support the man behind her and walked in. As she walked, she quickly pressed on the wall to turn on the lights. "Come on, sit down first. I'll help you wash your wound." Mr. Vince entered the door and glanced at the place she lived in. The first thing he saw was that the living room was neat and tidy. It was not as messy and full of things as she usually said. The apartment was more than 200 square meters, but the living room was large. The decoration was simple and not complicated. There was also the faint fragrance of a woman living alone in the air, making him feel inexplicably reluctant to leave as soon as he stepped in. "Sit there first. I'll go get the first aid kit." Jean Wan pointed to the sofa. "It's nothing serious. The fruit knife's sharpness can't be that serious. It's just a scratch on the surface of my skin. If it were really that deep, I would have gone to the hospital by now." Mr. Vince glanced at the sofa. There were 2 blue and white pillows by the side, like the color of the sky. The white fabric sofa was as clean as new. He sat down and looked up at the woman who was hurriedly looking for the first aid kit. Jean Wan brought the first aid kit, opened it, and rummaged through it for some simple medicine, gauze, and band-aids. As she took them, she said, "Even if you don't go to the hospital, he used a lot of force with the fruit knife just now. It's not that deep, but it's definitely not shallow. Don't you know how much blood you lost in the elevator?" As she spoke, she turned around to fetch a basin of water and took out a new towel from the drawer. She sat beside him and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt that had a long cut. Then, she carefully began to wipe the blood around the wound. Seeing Jean Wan's gentle and serious movements, Mr. Vince stared at her face. He watched as the little woman carefully wiped the wound clean, wiped the wound again with white gauze dipped in alcohol, and then changed the gauze to clean the wound. When the alcohol fell on the wound, Jean Wan was afraid that it would hurt too much, so she carefully blew it with her mouth and turned to ask him, "Does it hurt?" "Bear with it." Mr. Vince stared at her face. No. Seeing the man's eyes, Jean Wand shifted her gaze away and did not speak again. After cleaning the wound, she applied medicine and bandaged it several times with gauze. Finally, after the bandaging was done, she did not sit by his side for long and got up to organize the medicine box. Her movements were swift and capable. The 24-year-old Jean Wand was different from 3 years ago, but she did not give off the feeling of a young lady in her early 20s. She also had a special charm to her, and it was also her unique and indescribable charm. After tidying up everything, Jean Wand returned to the bedroom to search and finally came out empty-handed. Sorry, I don't have any clothes you can wear here. You can't change out of this shirt. Just roll up your sleeves and go back first. Mr. Vince lowered his eyes to look at the smooth bandage on his arm. I've never heard that you've studied medicine before. How did you manage to treat and bandage wounds so well? Being ill for a long time makes one a doctor. Over the years, I've been in many situations, big and small. Some time ago, I went to a birthday party and cut my arms and legs. I was often bandaged, but I learned it after a while. Jean Wand said as she lifted her legs, which were still in jeans. Didn't you notice that I was still wearing long sleeves and trousers on such a hot day? The wounds had not disappeared yet. The red and black patches were too unsightly, so she simply covered them up. Mr. Vince looked at her clothes and saw that her white chiffon sleeves were stained with his blood, so he pointed at them. Sorry, I dirtied your clothes. Jean Wand lowered her eyes to take a look and smiled indifferently. It's all right. If I can wash it, I'll wash it. If I can't, I'll change. Anyway, I have a lot of clothes. I still have 2 boxes of clothes I left in High City 3 years ago. I don't need 1 or 2 more. As for you, if something like this happens in the future, don't block it with your own hands. It's just a fruit knife. If it's an axe, your arm will be broken. What if I have to take responsibility for you? I'm not crippled, but I did see blood. Mr. Vince said half jokingly, half seriously, can you take responsibility for me for a few more days with this small injury? In order to repay your kindness, I brought you home, disinfected and bandaged you. I've already repaid you. Don't expect me to take responsibility for you. Jean Wand looked at him with a shrewd smile. Don't expect me to take responsibility for you. Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. This woman was really not easy to fool. He thought he could get some benefits from the injury, but in the blink of an eye, he owed her nothing. Mr. Vince sighed with a smile. Forget it. I'm happy to lose to you. He paused and looked around the place where she lived. After knowing you for so long, I can finally sit in your house for a while. It's really a good reward for me. Let alone a fruit knife, even if you really want me to break my arm, I'll be happy. You're already in your 30s. Can you speak properly? Don't act like a teenager who doesn't know what's good for him. If you really break your arm, I won't take responsibility, so don't stand up for me in the future. I know some self-defense skills. That kind of drunken lunatic can't hurt me. Jean Wand twisted her wrist and fist. Didn't you see Fong Ling by my side when you were in England? She taught me some. I'm very good. At that time, I saw that man pull you and almost pull you into his arms. I rushed over in a moment of desperation and didn't let you show your skills. It seems that it's my fault. Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. Jean Wand coughed. Forget it. It's all in the past. Since the injury is not serious, and it's all bandaged now, how will you go back? You can't drive like this, right? Shall I send you? Or call your secretary to pick you up? Mr. Vince raised his hand and moved his arm. It's all right. I can drive back myself. Jean-Wan didn't say more and tactfully asked him to leave. Neither of them were children. A grown man shouldn't stay in her house for too long. He certainly understood that. Chapter 488. Jean-Wan had indeed planned to move when she first returned to the country, but she had been too busy. Tonight's incident had indeed given her a wake-up call. Firstly, this place was far from the company. Secondly, the property management and security were not good enough. Anyone could sneak into the neighborhood. At that time, the drunkard had made such a big commotion that the security guards took a long time to come over. Coupled with the blackout, this was indeed not a good place to live. I'll consider moving. There are many good places near the company. I'll take some time to choose one. You can keep your apartment. Why keep it? It's just left there. You might as well pick a place to live. How could Jean-Wan not know that the so-called apartment was just bait for Mr. Vince? He had been waiting for her to take the bait. If she really moved into his apartment for convenience, it would be more convenient for him to go to her place in the future. For such an overly shrewd man, it was just like how he clearly could have avoided the knife in other ways, but he had still suffered such a stab. When a man really wanted a woman, his thoughts were actually deeper than those in those dramas and novels. We'll talk about this later. Mr. Vince, you should go. Jean-Wan smiled and asked him to leave again. Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. I suddenly regret having dinner downstairs. Otherwise, I could have stayed for a while longer with the excuse of staying for dinner. Jean-Wan turned to the door with a smile, opened it, and then turned to look at him. For my reputation and for your gentlemanly demeanor, Mr. Vince, please don't make things difficult for each other. I won't see you out. Mr. Vince was also a tactful person. Earlier, he had already stood up and did not sit down again. Seeing Jean-Wan's attitude, he walked to the door and turned to look at her. You said before that you'd treat me to dinner when you have time. Don't forget it. Jean-Wan nodded. Okay. Mr. Vince walked out of the door. As he waved at Jean-Wan, he looked at the lights in the corridor and the escalator on the side, saying, Be careful. Move out as soon as possible. Jean-Wan raised her hand and made an okay gesture. When he entered the elevator, she waved her hand and closed the door. Seeing Mr. Vince leave Jean-Wan's apartment and drive away, the bodyguard picked up the phone again. Mr. Vince left Miss G's place at 8:50 p.m. Miss G didn't show up, so she probably didn't send him off. Mr. Vince's car has already left. Mo Jingshan's expression melted into the dark night. So that man went up and sat for an entire 20 minutes. He glanced at the curtain of rain and then at the direction of Jean-Wan's apartment. His gaze was cold as he said coldly, within a week, get her to move out of this apartment. The bodyguard was surprised, but he didn't dare to ask more. Well, this apartment is very old and not very safe, but where should Miss G move to? Mo Jingshan's voice was calm. Yuehu Bay. The bodyguard was even more shocked. Yuehu Bay on the west side of the city was the only high-end residential area there. Although it wasn't built by Shine Group, when Yuehu Bay was first built, the company had specially gifted Mo Jingshan an apartment of several hundred square meters in the middle of Yuehu Bay. They had also gifted several smaller apartments below that apartment. The one with the best feng shui and scenery in the middle of Yuehu Bay was gifted to Mo Jingshan. Almost all of the good floors were given to Mo Jingshan, and they had all been luxuriously renovated. This showed their sincerity. However, after the gift, Mo Jingshan had never moved there. Everyone knew that it was a good place in the west side of the city. It was close to various office buildings and commercial streets. In the middle of it was High City's famous Yuehu Bay. The environment was good and it was a secluded holy land in the bustling city. But how could he successfully get Miss G to move there? The next day, Jean Wan went to the company and found some time to look at the nearby houses online. Regardless of whether it was an apartment or a normal residence, there were only 2 or 3 residential areas that were close to the company and comfortable to live in. However, the strange thing was that there were almost no houses that satisfied her satisfaction. Her first choice was Yuehu Bay, but it was said that Yuehu Bay was not only expensive, but many of the particularly good apartments had already been sold. The remaining empty apartments and residences could barely see the lake in the area. The second choice was the other 2 residential areas near Yuehu Bay, namely Jinmei International and Kyuli Residence. The better ones were the nearby European-style villas. She lived alone, and a villa was too exaggerated. There weren't many beautiful sceneries in the west side of the city. The only one was Yuehu Bay, which had the best reputation and was the most expensive. However, no matter how she looked, she couldn't find a place she liked. She didn't know why the apartments in the middle had been sold at a price of 70 to 80 million yuan. Although there were many rich people in High City, they wouldn't all gather in the west side of the city. There were clearly more rich people in the south, north, and east side of the city. Xiao Ba saw that she was looking at houses and came over to ask, "Boss, are you moving?" "And Aya, are you looking at Yuehu Bay?" And Xiao Ba suddenly pointed downstairs. "I just saw Yuehu Bay's property management holding an event downstairs. They said that the owner of the best building in the middle asked the property management to sell it because he has been abroad for a long time. Do you want to go take a look?" "Which is the best building?" Jean Wan opened the overall map of Yuehu Bay. After looking around, she decided on the 3 buildings between A1 and A3. "If it's one of these 3 buildings, I'll go take a look. Otherwise, there's no need. It really seems to start with the letter A. Anyway, there's nothing to do now. It's fine if you go downstairs and take a look." It was indeed time to move. Hearing this, Jean Wan got up and looked out the window. Xiao Ba came over and pointed in a direction not far away. Sure enough, she saw Yuehu Bay's people holding an event there. She went downstairs, picked up the flyers sent by the property management, and looked at it. Then she walked over and asked in confusion, "Can the upper 5 floors of Yuehu Bay's A1 be sold?" "Yes, the owner of these 5 floors has been abroad for a long time. There's no use for the houses in the country, so they asked us to sell them on their behalf." This building happened to be in the center of the lake view that Jean Wan particularly liked. She liked to live by the water, whether by the sea or by the lake. The scenery was good, the air was good, and it was close to the company. She heard that the property management here was also very good and safe. Chapter 489. He had heard from others that the apartments in Yuehu Bay were very difficult to buy. Even the few apartments with average scenery were very difficult to buy, and one had to go through all kinds of checkpoints and procedures to buy one. But it only took Jean Wan less than 2 days to complete the real estate transfer procedures. The next night, the house belonged to her. She bought the one below the top floor of Block A1. It was 150 square meters, enough for her to live in. More importantly, the view was as good as the top floor, and the wide balcony faced the center of Yuehu Lake. Jean Wan waited until the weekend to hire a moving company to help her move. Xiao Ba and several of her colleagues also came to help her pack up. Mr. Vince had been abroad on a business trip for 2 days and had not returned. When Jean Wan's apartment was moved, Mr. Vince finally returned. There was nothing he could do to help. "It's actually Yuehu Bay." On the phone, Mr. Vince had just gotten off the plane. He called Jean Wan from the airport and learned that she had moved to Yuehu Bay on the west side of the city. On the one hand, he was very confident about the security there, and on the other hand, he was depressed that he did not buy the apartment in Uehu Bay. He had bought almost all of the apartments and residential buildings around the MN Group except for the one in Uehu Bay. When he wanted to buy it, he learned that several of the best apartments in the center of the lake had been sold. He knew that with Jean Wan's character, she would definitely choose the best location with the best view of the lake. She would not choose any other location, so he gave up on Uehu Bay, a place with good feng shui. He did not expect that she would move there. Yes, I've moved here. That's right, I've already moved here. The place I used to live in is already empty. The property management and security here are not bad, much better than the place I used to live in. As expected, all of you were right to advise me to move. Thankfully, I've moved here. Otherwise, who knows what else would have happened in that small district. I often work overtime now, and there are quite a number of people stalking my company at night. It's indeed quite dangerous if I don't move to a safer district. Jean Wan was currently in her new home. As she spoke to Mr. Vince on the phone, she pushed open the floor-to-ceiling windows and stepped onto the balcony. Under the summer breeze, she admired the most beautiful view of the Moon Lake in the West District. Her lips curved into a smile. This scenery is really good. Mr. Vince sighed with a smile. He couldn't tell if it was fate or if she was deliberately avoiding him. He had thought that she would live near the company, but in the end, she chose Uehu Bay. The scenery there is really good, and it's also a treasure land in the western part of the city. It's good that you live comfortably there. After chatting for a while, Jean Wan hung up the phone because she had to go back to the company. After hanging up the phone, Mr. Vince's expression darkened. He picked up his cell phone and dialed another number. Give me the phone numbers of the property manager of Uehu Bay and the property manager in the western part of the city. Before calling Jean Wan, he had heard that the owner of the 5 floors above Uehu Bay's A1 had resold the property. It had not even been a week, and there were likely other floors in that building that had not been sold yet. It would be good to take this opportunity to buy the floor closest to Jean Wan. In the end, as the general manager of BGY Group, he called the person in charge there, but the answer he received was not accurate. They only said that the owner had gone abroad in the past few days and could not be contacted. Only the floor that Miss G had bought had the owner's consent. There were other people who had inquired about the other floors, but the owner had not replied in the past few days. They could resell it, but they could not make the final decision on their own. They still had to wait for the owner of those floors to personally agree. Mr. Vince asked for the contact information of the owner, but the other party said that they could not give it to him. Not to mention Mr. Vince's status in High City, even BGY Group was one of the top property companies in the country. It was rare for a property company to not give him face. They were so secretive when they wanted to contact the owner and did not even dare to mention a word about it. He called other people, but the answer he received was the same. The identity of the owner of the 5 floors in Uehu Bay could not be casually revealed. All 5 floors were under the same owner's name. Jean Wan lived on the second to last floor, which was equivalent to being surrounded by those floors. Jean Wan was usually really guarded. Why did she directly buy the apartment without even investigating who the owner was? Mr. Vince rushed all the way from the airport to the city with an ugly expression. It took him 2 days to barely find the email address of the mysterious owner. According to the property manager of Uehu Bay, if they wanted to sell those apartments, they had to send an application to the owner's email address. They only needed to receive the other party's approval or call back. However, for the past few days, the email address had been very quiet. The owner was most likely too busy and did not have the time to care about these apartments. I'm sorry, Mr. Vince. We're only reselling the apartment. Miss G bought it on the first day. It's likely that the owner hasn't left the country yet, so he replied very quickly and agreed. However, the owner hasn't replied yet. There's really nothing we can do. Mr. Vince took the email address given to him by the property manager and returned home to personally fill in the application. He explained the entire process in the email and then sent the information that would allow him to purchase the apartment in full. That night, the mysterious owner finally received a reply from his email address. BGY Vince, hello, I personally apply to purchase the apartment in Uehu Bay, Block A1, under your name. All the letters and information have been sent. I can purchase the apartment in full in one go. I can increase the price as appropriate. Please agree. Mysterious owner, disagree. BGY Vince, hello, I'm purchasing the apartment in Uehu Bay under your name in the name of High Cities BGY Group. All the letters and information have been sent. I can purchase the remaining 4 floors. The price is negotiable. Please agree. Mysterious owner, disagree. BGY Vince, the price is negotiable. You can state the price you want. You'll be leaving the country for a long time. There's no need for you to keep the apartment in High City. Since you've already sold one, why don't you sell the remaining floors to our company or purchase them under my name? The mysterious owner did not reply. BGY Vince, I'll double the price. Mysterious owner, disagree. At this moment, the night breeze was gentle. Jean-Wan sat on the balcony of her new home, leisurely drinking the lemonade she made herself and looking at the lake scenery at night. She was completely unaware that 2 men had started an email war because of her new home. Chapter 490. A1 was a 16-story building, and the top 5 stories belonged to the mysterious owner. After Jean-Wan moved here, because this place was close to the company, she didn't have to drive to the company to avoid traffic jams. Every day, she had 40 to 50 minutes to run and exercise. On the first day, she ran into a neighbor. After chatting casually for a while, she learned that she had just moved here. The neighbor immediately greeted her warmly and asked her all kinds of questions. Then do you know who owns the top 5 stories? I don't think I've seen them before. They're really mysterious. The prices of the top 5 stories are not low. They add up to hundreds of millions of yuan. I wonder what kind of owner can buy the best floors in Uehu Bay. Any house on those floors is 2 or 3 times more expensive than the ones below. He owns all 5 floors, but he doesn't want to move in. Previously, when we asked around, we heard that he's a private owner and not bought by a real estate company. That's why I'm even more curious. I'm not sure. It's a real estate agent. Anyway, the other party has all the necessary paperwork, and the house is brand new. It's close to where I work, so I bought it. I thought you would know. I thought you must have met the mysterious owner before buying this house, but you haven't even seen him. Jean-Wan curved her lips. I haven't. Didn't you say that he has left the country? He probably won't be back for a long time. Then your house must be expensive, right? I saw that you bought a house on the 15th floor with the best view of the lake. The balcony faces the Moon Lake. Oh right, I heard that the one on the top floor is more than 400 square meters. It has a balcony on all 4 sides and a 360-degree view of the scenery is on that floor. Since the other party is willing to sell it, why didn't you buy the top floor? The neighbor was warm, but she was too warm and asked too many questions. Jean-Wan did not answer them. She only smiled. The house is too big and seems too empty. After saying that, she took the towel from behind her neck and wiped off the thin layer of sweat that had formed from running. She smiled politely and ran away, no longer chatting idly. After running, she went upstairs to take a shower and got ready for work. When she took the elevator, she looked at the numbers on the top 5 floors and recalled how quickly and smoothly she bought this house on impulse. She just didn't have time and was in a hurry to buy a suitable one. She didn't have time to pick and choose a house. Anyway, the owner hadn't been here for a long time. Everything about the house met her satisfaction, so she bought it happily. However, she didn't expect the owner to be so mysterious. Even the neighbors who had lived here for a year or two didn't know who he was. Speaking of which, the price of these floors was really not low. Hundreds of millions of yuan of real estate was directly thrown here, so this house was either bought by the construction company as a gift or casually thrown here by a particularly rich man who was not in a hurry to live in it. She thought about it and felt that such a rich man shouldn't have any evil intentions. Besides, the property manager said that the owner had never lived here, so she bought it with confidence. After taking a shower, she went to work. 2 days passed peacefully. Suddenly, she received a call from Xia Tian at 11 o'clock, saying that she was about to give birth and was about to enter the delivery room. Jean Wan jumped up from the bed in shock. By the time she arrived at the hospital in the city center, it was already 20 minutes later. At this time, Xia Tian had already entered the delivery room. There were many people standing outside. She raised her brows when she saw a man dressed in a black SWAT police uniform push through the crowd and rush in. The moment he entered, he immediately grabbed the doctor and asked her how she was doing with a serious and concerned expression. Jean Wan stood by the side and raised her brows. It seemed like this was the SWAT big brother Xia Tian mentioned earlier. She saw the bars and stars on his shoulders. It seemed like he had made many contributions in the anti-drug missions at the border this year. He was actually a colonel. He was really low-key when she met him at the police station. Xia Tian had called her before entering the delivery room. She had complained about how she didn't know when her man would come back, but now he had already rushed to the delivery room. Not bad, he was in time. At the very least, he didn't miss Xia Tian giving birth. Xia Tian was usually straightforward and generous. Although she only had Jean Wan as her best friend, she had many other close friends, especially her colleagues from MN Group. Right now, many of them had rushed over. They all thought that her man wasn't by her side and were afraid that she would be alone in the hospital, so they rushed over to accompany and help. In the end, there were so many people that the outside of the delivery room was almost filled. Jean Wan retreated a little. She would wait until the child was born. The hospital in the city center was where Qin Siding worked. After hearing the news, Qin Siding came to take a look at the floor of the delivery room. Jean Wan had just retreated to the middle of the corridor when Qin Siding arrived. The air conditioning in the corridor was slightly cold. He wore a thin windbreaker and a white coat. He had just finished a surgery and rushed over. Jean Wan. Qin Siding immediately saw Jean Wan, who was standing outside the crowd. Dr. Qin. Jean Wan saw Qin Siding, whom she had not seen for many years, and smiled at him. This is the delivery room. Why are you here? Miss Xia is your friend. In the past few years, she has often come to the hospital and can be considered a very close friend of mine. I heard that she is about to give birth, so I came to take a look. Qin Siding placed one hand in the pocket of his white coat. Seeing that there were too many people in the delivery room, he did not approach. He only looked at Jean Wan. I haven't seen you for 3 years. You look good. Jean Wan. It's okay. No matter how one lives alone, one can always be happy. No matter how hard it is, at least the benefits are proportional to the effort. Qin Siding lightly curved his lips. That's good. Men usually did not talk too much about relationships with women, nor would they gossip too much about other people's relationships. However, seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be very happy living alone, he thought for a moment and did not tell her about Imo Jingshan's completely different state in the past few years. Chapter 491. They didn't talk much. Jinwon didn't even ask about Shirnianj. After all, she didn't even have a good relationship with him. How could she be qualified to care about someone else's relationship? However, she could tell from Xiao Lui that Xiao Lui's attempt to snatch Shirnianj had failed. Xia Tian gave birth to a son. Jinwon did not sleep for the entire night and busied herself. She only sat in the maternity ward when the sun rose. She teased the little fellow who had already opened his eyes while listening to Xia Tian flirting with her little brother SWAT officer. You only came back after I was pregnant for so long. I thought you were going to abandon us. You still know to come back. Why don't you just shed blood for your motherland and stay at the border for the rest of your life? Why did you come back? I submitted an application to the higher-ups. I won't be leaving for a few months. Who cares if you leave or not? Xia Tian rolled her eyes and then turned to look at the little baby on the small bed not far away. She said with disdain, "Who does this child look like? Why is he so wrinkled and ugly?" The nurse who had just walked in chuckled. Newborn babies are all like this. You'll know who he looks like in a few days. This child's father is tall and handsome, and his mother is beautiful. He's definitely a good-looking baby. Hearing this, Xia Tian happily pulled back her attention to glare at her little brother. Jinwon saw that the little baby only opened his eyes for a while before falling asleep again, so she didn't continue to be a third wheel. She got up and was about to go out. Hey, where are you going? Xia Tian asked. Jinwon glanced at her. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. You've just gotten your marriage certificate and have been separated for several months. If I don't go, am I supposed to sit here and eat your dog food? Xia Tian immediately winked at her. Didn't you and Imo Jingshan feed me enough dog food? This is called an eye for an eye. You have to eat it even if you don't want to. Jinwon, she directly pulled the door open and left without looking back. When she came back with some tonics in the afternoon, Xia Tian remembered to introduce her. Well, Jinwon is my best friend. When you interrogated me at the police station, it was she who stood up for me. I've mentioned her to you many times. There's no need to introduce her. As she spoke, she pointed at the handsome policeman beside her. This is my child's father, Ling Jichin. Jinwon and the policeman politely nodded at each other. If it weren't for the fact that she really wanted to see Xia Tian's baby, she wouldn't have continued to sit here and eat dog food. She had thought that the two of them would have finished talking in the morning, but in the afternoon, she heard Xia Tian lying on the bed moaning and complaining, "Let me tell you, I'm the only one who can't get the credit for running to the border. If I cry and make you come back every day, you won't get the credit. Then you'll be kicked out of the army and have to go home to inherit the family business, counting bills every day until you die of exhaustion." The policeman nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, without a daughter-in-law as generous as you, I would have to obediently go home to inherit the family business. Just thinking about it makes me feel miserable. All right, I'll give you the credit. Xia Tian snorted again. Jinwon's scalp turned numb from the dog food. Hey, by the way, Nuan, I heard from Xiao Ba that you moved. What happened? Did someone really follow you where you lived previously? Xia Tian suddenly looked at Jinwon. No, it's just that I met a drunkard on my way back. Considering that the environment where I lived previously wasn't very safe, I moved away. Jinwon gently touched the little baby's hand as she answered. That won't do. It's not safe for you to live alone. Fengling doesn't have time to accompany you right now, does she? How about this, I'll ask my child's father to find you an intern from the special police force or something. Find someone skilled to be your bodyguard. As she spoke, Xia Tian raised her head to look at the man by the bed who was dressed in a sharp police uniform but had a gentle gaze. Do you have any suitable candidates? Find someone smart, and good at martial arts. Ah, that's right, it's best if he's single. Someone handsome. Jinwan, this week, Jinwan found that someone seemed to have moved into Yuehu Bay again. There were several cars transporting new furniture in the residential area that was usually off-limits to cars. At the same time, she found that the furniture seemed to have been moved into A1 building. Many of the neighbors whispered that they had inquired about it and found that the furniture was to be sent to the top floor of the 16th floor. The top floor. Was it the one above her, that apartment of more than 400 square meters? It was strange. A few days ago, Mr. Vince had told her to pay attention to her safety when she returned home. After all, the 5 floors closest to her were empty, and she was the only one living there. He also said that he had tried to contact the mysterious owner of these 5 floors in the name of his company, wanting to purchase the best units in these few floors of Yuehu Bay, but was rejected. After that, he had not been able to contact the mysterious owner. He also said that he did not know the identity of the mysterious owner, and that she had to be careful at all times. He also said that she had to set up more protective measures for the locks and door passwords of her home. Didn't he say that even the property management couldn't contact the owner, so the apartment couldn't be sold for the time being? But why did the furniture on the upper floor suddenly move in? These 5 floors seemed to have been luxuriously renovated when they were built, and all the materials used were top-notch. Apart from the furniture, electrical appliances, and daily necessities, everything else was well renovated and didn't need to be refurbished. That was why she could move in so quickly. So the 16th floor, the apartment was sold. Someone was going to move in. Miss, please make way. 2 workers who were moving a wine cabinet passed by. As Jinwan was standing in the middle of the apartment's main entrance, they had to ask her to make way. Jinwan hurriedly turned to the side to make way for the 2 workers. She then turned to look at the wine cabinet the 2 workers were moving. Earlier, she saw the workers moving the various tables and chairs in the study. Now, they were moving the wine cabinet. The colors were all black, white, gray, or dark blue. These colors, so the new tenant on the 16th floor was a man. Jinwan got off work early today and wasn't in a hurry to go upstairs. She simply sat on the bench by the lawn and watched the workers move things. Bed, sofa, coffee table, cupboard, moving around, she didn't see anything like a crib or a child's bed. She also didn't see anything like a dresser that women could use. From this, she concluded that the new tenant on the 16th floor was a single man. When the workers came down, a neighbor asked curiously, "Has the apartment on the top floor been sold as well? Who's going to move in?" Chapter 492. In the past 2 weeks after Jinwan moved into Yuehu Bay, she was either at the company, at home, or at Xia Tian's place to see the baby every day. She had little contact with other people. The security facilities here were too perfect. Mr. Vince wanted to wait for her downstairs like before, or pick her up on the excuse that she was far from the company, but these reasons seemed unrealistic. As a result, he had been struggling to find an opportunity to see Jinwan recently. It was rare for him to learn from her secretary that Jinwan would get off work at 4:00 today, and knowing that she had nothing to do tonight, Mr. Vince had been waiting for her since 3:00 in the afternoon. When Jinwan came out of the company just after 4:00, she saw Mr. Vince's car parked downstairs of the MN Group's office building. The man got out of the car and had been waiting for her for a long time. "Where are you going? Shall I give you a ride?" He opened the car door and motioned for her to get in. "No, I drove to the company today. I plan to visit Xia Tian first." She has been discharged from the hospital after giving birth. I'm going to buy some milk powder and clothes for her. In the past 3 years, you have not been in High City, and I have been in touch with CEO Xia often. I haven't visited her since the baby was born. Why don't I go with you today? Jean Wan was about to decline him, but hearing this, she couldn't refuse his kindness on Xia Tian's behalf. She paused and said, "All right, I'll give you her address. You go there first. I'll buy some things and drive there myself. Let's go together. I can't go empty-handed." "All right, let's go together." Jean Wan got in the car and pointed to a shopping mall nearest to where Xia Tian lived. It was said that there were many baby shops there. Mr. Vince accompanied her to a baby store to buy several cans of imported milk powder, baby clothes, and various toys. He also bought some nutrition products for Xia Tian. She thought there wouldn't be a lot, but there were still a lot of big and small bags. She didn't want Mr. Vince to help her, but she had no choice but to let him carry 2 big bags back to the car. When the 2 of them walked out of the nursery shop, it was already late at night. It was really inconvenient to drive the car that was parked across the road here, so the 2 of them carried a pile of baby products across the road. Jean Wan was all smiles as she looked at the baby clothes in the bags. It turned out that a child's clothes could be so small. Let alone visiting a child, just a small piece of clothing was enough to melt a person's heart. In the traffic, a black Bugatti was hidden among the many cars, and the headlights were dazzling. The man in the car watched Jean Wan cross the road with a pile of baby clothes in her arms and watched her softly follow Mr. Vince to the parking lot across the road with a smile in her eyes. Shen Mu, who was driving, also caught a glimpse of Jean Wan. He immediately had a bad feeling and looked at the rearview mirror, only to see that his CEO Mo's eyes, which were usually indifferent, were deep and dangerous. It was not difficult to guess why CEO Mo's expression was so cold at this moment. It was rare for him to have a dinner party in the West City district, but he saw such a scene on the road. Even Shenmu couldn't help but sigh, not to mention CEO Mo Miss G and Mr. Vince came out together with so many baby clothes, talking and laughing, looking a little warm and sweet, like a loving couple who had been married for a long time. After all, they had been divorced for more than 3 years. If Jean Wan and Mr. Vince really had feelings for each other, it was not completely unreasonable. After all, Mr. Vince had never hidden his pursuit of Jean Wan, and because of BGY Group, Mr. Vince's status in High City was not weak. Among Jean Wan's many pursuers, his appearance and identity were barely acceptable, his aura would not be easily suppressed by Jean Wan's limelight and momentum, and his patience was definitely the best. Most of the other pursuers were given the cold shoulder by Jean Wan and gave up. Only this one person persisted, just like before. Mr. Vince sent Jean Wan downstairs to Xia Tian's home, but remembering that Xia Tian was still in confinement, and according to the old people, men were not allowed to visit her at will, Mr. Vince only sent her here, helped her carry all the things into the elevator, and didn't go in again. Jean Wan went to visit Xia Tian, but because the child was sleeping, she didn't want to disturb the child, so she left in less than half an hour. When she came out, she saw Mr. Vince was still waiting for her in the car, so she naturally took his car back to Yuehu Bay. When she arrived at Yuehu Bay, Jean Wan suddenly received a phone call. She picked up the phone, nodded politely to Mr. Vince, and hurriedly got out of the car. Without saying a word, she walked into the community of Yuehu Bay while talking on the phone. Mr. Vince looked outside for a while, then glanced at the other houses in Yuehu Bay that were further away from the lake view. He was considering whether he should settle for the next best thing and buy another house here, at least to shorten the distance. Jean Wan had already walked far away. He opened the door and got out of the car. Before he called the person in charge of the real estate here, he suddenly saw a luxurious but low-key black Bugatti parked beside him, just separating him from the main gate of Yuehu Bay. The door of the driver's seat opened, and Shenmue got out of the car. As soon as his eyes met Mr. Vince's expression changed slightly. There was no need for him to say anything more. Based on the fact that BGY, a real estate company, and his private investigation skills were unable to identify the owner of the property, he was certain that the other party must have an extraordinary background. He had even suspected that this had something to do with Mo Jingshan. But now, seeing this black Bugatti and Shenmue getting out of the car, he instantly understood everything. Mr. Vince, what a coincidence to meet you here. Shenmue smiled. What's wrong? Did you chase Miss G all the way here? Mr. Vince's thoughts paused for a moment. He looked past Shenmue, who was smiling like a fox, to the car behind him. He glanced at the back window of the car and said calmly and indifferently, "It is indeed a coincidence. It seems that my guess is right. I'm afraid the owner I've been unable to contact is CEO Mo himself." Shenmue smiled. We've all been in the business world for a long time. There's no need to explain everything. Mr. Vince has always been shrewd and difficult to grasp. When it comes to relationships, I advise you not to touch anyone you shouldn't touch. Chapter 493. When Jean Wan first went to England, although she said that she had let go of him and that everything was over, she would often stare blankly alone. It wasn't easy for her to finally get over that stage and completely dig the 3 words Mo Jingshan out of her life. She lived a different life. He was happy that she returned to High City, but on the other hand, he was worried. He wasn't sure what Mo Jingshan planned to do with her. And now, it seemed that Mo Jingshan never intended to let go of her. Although Yuehu Bay is a good place, the west side of the city is still remote. I never expected that CEO Mo would deign to come here. Mr. Vince's eyes were still fixed on the car window as he spoke. Shenmue put one hand in his trouser pocket and chuckled. Mr. Vince, I never expected that you would even dare to chase CEO Mo's ex-wife. You've been chasing her for 3 years, but you still haven't succeeded. What's the point of waiting silently like this? Miss G moved here not only for her own safety, but also to guard against you, right? Shenmue could stay by Mo Jingshan's side for so long not only because he was good at dealing with people, but also because he knew what he should say and what he shouldn't say. He was especially good at grasping people's hearts, just like this shrewd Mr. Vince. He knew him very well. Mr. Vince sneered. I don't know who she's guarding against, but I believe your CEO Mo must know better than me. Whose place does the 5 floors of Yuehu Bay belong to? Tell me, should I remind her or not? At this time, the black rear window of the low-key car slowly rolled down. The man in the car looked at the people outside with deep, unruffled eyes, and his voice was cold and slow. I've always heard that the general manager of BGY Group is a rare person who stepped into the upper class with his own shrewdness and identity without a background. As long as you're sure you can bear the price, I don't mind you giving it a try. Mr. Vince sneered. CEO Mo, you've been in the business world for so long. You're an outstanding member of the upper class, and it's rare for you to be sober and have a good grasp of everything. We've already divorced. There's really no need to disturb Jean Wan's life. Mo Jingshan had already retracted his gaze, not giving him a single glance. His gaze seemed to be stained with the coldness of the night. This is my problem. Based on your current status as BGY's general manager, you wish to pursue the leader of MN Group. Mr. Vince, are you overestimating your own charisma? Or are you presumptuously assuming that Jean Wan's gratitude and kindness toward you is because she treats you differently? There was a hint of displeasure and embarrassment hidden on Mr. Vince's face, but it happened to hit the nail on the head. Jean Wan's patience and compromise with him was indeed because he had helped her during her most difficult years in England. But because he didn't want to hear the word gratitude, she didn't say it out loud. But now, Mo Jingshan had directly pointed it out. Mo Jingshan's cold face did not reveal any emotion. From his indifferent expression, Mr. Vince could tell that Mo Jingshan had long found him an eyesore. As long as he wanted to make a move, it would be impossible for him to continue standing in Sea City. Perhaps it was because he had helped Jean Wan before that Mo Jingshan had never touched him. The car window closed once more, blocking off the two men's gazes. Shen Mu was still smiling at him. At this moment, he had already stood by the side smoking a cigarette. Before entering the car, he handed another cigarette to Mr. Vince, smiling as he asked if he smoked. Mr. Vince did not take it, so Shenmue casually tossed the cigarette onto the ground. He smiled mildly and said, "Mr. Vince, you're on your best behavior. Things that don't belong to you, don't even mention 3 years. Even after 30 years, I'm afraid it still won't be yours. Why do you have to ruin your future for someone who has never belonged to you?" After speaking, Shenmue entered the car. The noble and cold man in the car did not lower the car window again. The luxurious yet low-profile black Bugatti drove past them. Mr. Vince's cold aura slowly retracted. In the end, his hands that hung by his side slowly clenched into fists. He was clearly a successful person in his career. He was proud and conceited. But at this moment, he felt somewhat defeated. Jean Wan's heart was really hard to conquer. 3 years had not even melted the tip of the iceberg. His mouth was his. Now, as long as he picked up his cell phone and called her, based on Jean Wan's attitude toward Mo Jingshan, she would definitely leave Yuehu Bay immediately and never take another step forward. But could he say this? It was all up to him. Recently, Jean Wan had gone on a business trip and stayed in Canada for another half a month before returning. As soon as she returned, she had been busy with the construction project of High City Stadium. She worked overtime, read plans, and went to the construction site for inspection. As long as she could, she would take a look at every process. It was already the end of August, and she had been back from England for more than 2 months, almost 3 months. This time, the meeting with the construction bureau was still held in Shine Group, but today, most of the participants in the meeting were other members of Shine Group. Mo Jingshan was not there, so the meeting was not affected. She just needed to ask the people of Shine Group to inform the higher-ups. That night, after the meeting, Jean Wan dragged her tired body back to rest. After all, she had been so busy for the past half a month that she fell asleep as soon as she hit the bed. Now she just wanted to go back, take a shower, and sleep as soon as possible. However, when she walked out of Shine Group, she suddenly saw Shenmue park the black Bugatti outside and motioned for Jean Wan to get in the car. Why did he want her to get in the car? Jean Wan glanced at Shenmue in confusion. Shenmue did not explain and only signaled for her to hurry up. The spot where he parked was not a normal parking spot, and there were cars passing by. If he kept parking here, it would affect other people's driving. Jean Wan thought Shenmue had something to say to her, so she walked over. When she approached, Shenmue looked back and motioned for her to sit in the back. She opened the car door in confusion and saw Mo Jingshan sitting in the back. Jean Wan, she wondered why Shenmue was so mysterious, but it turned out that he just wanted her to get in the car. Jean Wan pursed her lips and did not speak. Hearing the car behind her honking and telling them not to block the road, she got in the car. In the car, Mo Jingshan only glanced at her and tilted his head back. He raised his hand and casually tugged at the collar of his shirt. He must have had a dinner party and drank some wine. Right now, the alcohol was kicking in, and he was feeling a little uncomfortable sitting in the car for a long time. Shenmue started the car. Before Jin Wan could say whether she was going home or back to the company, Mo Jingshan opened his eyes and turned to look at her, wanting to see if she was looking at the scenery. However, from the corner of his eye, he saw that she was almost leaning against the door. The space in the back seat was not small, but she had forcibly widened the distance between them by about 1.5 meters. Chapter 494. The sky gradually darkened, and it was very dark inside the car. Shenmu's car drove very steadily, and it was as though he was purposely pretending he did not exist. He did not make a single sound, and at this moment, the car was so quiet that even Mo Jingshan's slightly drunk breathing could be heard clearly. "You're almost pressed against the car door. If the door could be opened right now, would you even be able to jump out of the car?" Mo Jingshan's tone was neither salty nor mild as he spoke. Due to the heavy atmosphere in the car, he casually unbuttoned one of the buttons on his collar. The man's collarbone that was usually meticulously buttoned was sexy and alluring. Coupled with the man's slightly low and hoarse voice, it caused one's heart to instinctively jump upon hearing it. Jin Wan did not look at him and shifted her gaze away. "There's indeed no need for me to sit in this car. Earlier, if it wasn't because the car was blocking the road and I was too embarrassed to dawdle there and affect the passing of others, I wouldn't have come up." The man whom she had forcefully pulled away from her by 1.5 meters turned to look at her. His distant and heavy gaze landed on her face. "I'm just sending you home. It's not like I'll eat you up." Why did his words sound as though she was the heartless and ungrateful one who did not understand good intentions? Good person. Mo Jingshan. Did he count? Jin Wan was expressionless as she looked out the window. She maintained her posture of leaning against the door and did not wish to approach him at all. All of a sudden, the car arrived at an intersection ahead. A speeding ambulance sped over from the other side of the road. Shenmu rushed to step on the emergency brake. Jin Wan was only sitting on the seat closest to the side. Not only was she not wearing her seatbelt, but she was also unstable. In an instant, the inertia and force of the emergency brake sent her entire body forward. Her head knocked against the nearest window, and her elbow knocked against the door. The pain caused her to softly cry out in pain, but she held it in and did not make another sound. She only raised her hand to press against her slightly aching forehead. Shenmu looked at Jin Wan through the rearview mirror and said apologetically, "I'm sorry." Earlier, an ambulance suddenly sped over. It was probably rushing to the hospital to save someone's life. I had no choice but to suddenly brake. "Miss G, are you all right?" Jin Wan shook her head and did not speak. She just raised her hand and waved twice, indicating that she was fine, and then continued to lean against the car door. However, less than 5 minutes later, the car passed another traffic light intersection and suddenly made a sharp turn in the middle of the intersection. Before she could react, she was thrown away from the car door. Before she realized what was going on, she fell sideways toward Mo Jingshan. She had just realized this and was about to dodge, but she couldn't bear the inertia of the sudden turn. She couldn't control her body at all and instantly fell sideways on the man's lap. Her head also hit hard against his lower abdomen uncontrollably. The area below her head was currently pressed against Jin Wan. She didn't have the time to ask Shenmu why he suddenly made a sharp turn, nor was she in a rush to ask why he was driving the car as though it was drifting in the city. Jin Wan quickly sat up and moved away from the man's lap. She then raised her hand to push back the messy hair on his lap and sat stiffly in her seat. Mo Jingshan's gaze was deep as he looked at the woman beside him who had an awkward expression but was unwilling to speak. After she had tidied up her hair, he saw that it was only shoulder length. Just as Jin Wan was about to continue leaning against the door, he abruptly raised his hand to hold her wrist and pulled her back. Jin Wan almost fell into his embrace again. She rushed to steady herself and leaned against the door. At the same time, she stared in shock at the man beside her with his deep gaze. "What are you doing?" As she spoke, she subconsciously wanted to move to the side. However, her arm was instantly held tightly by him. "Ahem, sorry. Earlier on, I forgot to turn at that intersection and almost drove over. Thankfully, I made the turn in time." Shenmue, who was in the driver's seat, did not turn back or look at the rearview mirror. He only gave a perfunctory explanation. Jin-won was speechless. Shenmue, this bastard. Although he didn't brake on purpose earlier, the turn earlier was definitely intentional. Jin-won moved to withdraw her hand from Mo Jingshan's palm. However, the man turned around by her side and pressed his long arm against her shoulder, trapping her between the leather car seat and his body. When Jin-won's cold gaze landed on him, his black eyes narrowed and he wrapped his arm around her shoulder, trapping her in his embrace. Finally, he saw the coldness in Jin-won's eyes turn into shock and resistance. However, all her struggles were easily suppressed by him. Instead, the two of them moved even closer to each other. She was almost pressed against the seat by him, unable to move at all. "Mo Jingshan, what are you doing?" In the darkness of the car, Jin-won's complexion turned slightly pale due to his forceful approach. The man placed one hand on the back of the seat behind her and held her with the other, trapping her in his cool breath. He lowered his eyes and looked at her unhappy face from such a close distance. Her slender and soft body kept struggling in his embrace. His gaze was dark and heavy as he said, "Get out of the car." She could clearly feel that these two words were not meant for her. He was asking Shenmue to get out of the car. Jin-won stared at him in disbelief. "Mo Jingshan. What do you mean?" However, Shenmue had already parked the car by the side of the road in a timely manner. Then, he quickly disappeared from the car. The moment the driver's door was slammed shut with a pang, Jin-won's heart leaped to her throat. It was one feeling to have a third person in the car, but it was definitely another feeling when it was only her and Mo Jingshan in the car. "Don't move. If you move again, I can't guarantee what will happen in this car." The man's voice was low and warm. He looked into her eyes and suddenly chuckled, but his voice was low. "You know, I drank tonight." Jin-won froze and stared in disbelief at the man who openly expressed his intention to commit violence while drunk. Her heart felt stifled. So, just because he smelled of alcohol, he wanted to take the opportunity to act crazily. Jin-won immediately sneered mockingly. For so long, she had thought that she could be tactful and maintain a proper distance with him, but she did not expect that one day, Mo Jingshan could also be so shameless to this extent. His eyes narrowed and he did not say a word. However, the sudden change in her tone made Mr. Vince feel something was wrong. Although he was touched by her rare concern for him, he still asked, "Who are you with now?" Before Jin-won could speak, the phone in her hand was suddenly taken by Mo Jingshan. She raised her eyes to glare at him, only to see that the man was holding her phone and indifferently and coldly spitting out a word. "Me." With that, without waiting for the other party's response, he hung up and tossed the phone onto the seat by her side. Jin-won forcibly swallowed back the curses on the tip of her tongue. She gritted her teeth to resist the urge to scold him, picked up the phone angrily, and put it back into her bag. She turned to see that the car was parked in a parking space at an intersection. She immediately reached out to open the car door, only to find that it was locked. The same thing again. Even Shenmue had learned this trick. He had already gotten out of the car, so why did he still lock the car door? Jin-won knitted her brows. She found that she was actually a little afraid of staying with Mo Jingshan like this, especially in such an enclosed space where his scent was everywhere. Seeing that she sat stiffly by the car door, the man suddenly leaned over. Jin-won immediately leaned back against the car door and stared at him with an ugly expression. "Mo Jingshin, you didn't drink much at all. Don't act recklessly just because you're tipsy. Although I don't know what your purpose is, I know that you're very sober." Mo Jingshin was unmoved. He just leaned close to her, their breaths entwined, but he did not restrain her. But in fact, it was the same whether he held her down or not, because she could not get out of the car. His eyes were deep and heavy, but hers were cold and full of resistance. "Remove Vince from your relationships. If I see you have any contact with him again, he can forget about taking a step into high city in this life." The man coldly spat out these words and then released her under Jin-won's stunned gaze. It was clear that his headache these days was real. He sat back in his seat, pressed his slender fingers between his brows, and did not say another word. Jin-won stiffly leaned against the car door for a long time before she gradually returned to herself. "Was it you who prevented Mr. Vince from returning to High City for the time being?" "No, for the sake of him helping you through several difficulties, I won't touch him." Mo Jingshin put down his hand that was originally pressed against his brows and turned to look at her guarded eyes. "But if you continue to maintain an ambiguous relationship with him, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to control my hand." After confirming that he was not despicable enough to touch Mr. Vince, Jin-won's heart finally calmed down a little. But what did this mean? A threat? She coldly looked at him. "Isn't Shine Group very busy? But why do I see that you're so free that you even care about your ex-wife's love life? We divorced a long time ago, didn't we? Emotionally, we broke up, and legally, we have no relationship. Why do you care if I have an ambiguous relationship with Mr. Vince or some other guy?" As she spoke, Jin-won's face turned a little pale. At this time, Shenmue opened the car door and returned to the car. The moment the door was opened, the lights in the car automatically turned on, clearly illuminating Jin-won's pale face. Mo Jingshin glanced at her and then glanced at her, seemingly inadvertently covering her stomach with her hand. He glanced at the time and asked in a low voice, "Didn't you have lunch?" Jin-won was too lazy to talk to him. Seeing that she had been discovered, she no longer hid. She covered her stomach with her hand and gently rubbed it, not speaking or responding to his words. Chapter 496. Jin-won didn't particularly like Western food. She liked Chinese restaurants or home-cooked meals, which was her habit. Knowing what Mo Jingshin meant, she looked out of the window expressionlessly. "No, thank you, CEO Mo. I can go home and cook some noodles. You don't have to spend so much money on me." She paused and then said, "Of course, it doesn't seem necessary for me to treat you to dinner, so please let me get out of the car and let me go home by myself." She changed the way she addressed him to CEO Mo again. Shenmue pretended not to hear anything. The car had almost reached a good restaurant nearby, and he slowed down the car. Jin-won's attitude didn't soften at all. She was even colder than when she got in the car. Mo Jingshin didn't seem to want to force her. He said indifferently, "Send her back." "Oh, okay." Shenmue continued to speed up the car. As he drove the car in the direction of where Jin-won used to live, he deliberately asked, "Miss Ji, are you still living in the previous apartment? I'll just take you there, right?" Jin-won paused. "No, I moved. Now I live close to the company, in the West City." Shenmue immediately turned the car around in time and drove in the direction of the West City. As he drove, he said, "Oh, fortunately I asked. Otherwise, I would have gone in the wrong direction. Where do you live in the West City now? Send me back to the company. It's only a 10-minute walk from the company to home. I'll go back to the company to pick up something." Jin Wan's voice was flat and emotionless. Shenmu hesitated. Seeing in the rearview mirror that Mo Jingshan didn't seem to want to speak, he could only say cooperatively, okay. Jin Wan thought it seemed that they didn't know where she had moved. So, the reason why Mo Jingshan knew where she lived was because he already knew it 3 years ago. Previously, in Yuehu Bay, people often asked about the mysterious owner. Because the mysterious owner seemed to have an unusual identity, she once suspected that he might have something to do with Mo Jingshan. Although she didn't know why she had that suspicion, when she saw the various kinds of furniture moved in by the workers, she felt that the style was very similar to that of Aolon International. But now that she thought about it, maybe it was just a coincidence. That kind of simple and elegant black and white decoration and the style of the furniture should be the style that many modern men liked. She was probably thinking too much. Now that she saw that Shenmu seemed to be completely unaware of her new residence, she must have been overthinking. After driving to the west side of the city, Jin Wan saw that they were getting closer and closer to Yuehu Bay. She glanced into the distance and did not stop at Yuehu Bay. It was very quiet in the car. Mo Jingshan was resting with his eyes closed and did not say a word. Shenmu didn't look in the direction of Yuehu Bay either. He drove through the main gate and headed straight for the MN Group's office building. She thought Shenmu was going to stop the car and was about to say, "Thank you," when he slowly opened his eyes and said, "You haven't had lunch since noon. No matter how busy you are, you don't have to make things difficult for your stomach. Get out of the car and go eat something." Shenmu was about to stop the car when he opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "You haven't eaten anything since noon." There were some cafes and restaurants around the plaza in front of the office building, as well as some other restaurants. Jin Wan said coldly without raising her eyes, "No need. I'm not hungry." Mo Jingshan's handsome features were still indifferent as if what she saw was just an illusion. His voice was cold and low. "You're not hungry? Then eat with me." Jin Wan turned to glare at him. "CEO Mo, I think you're really drunk. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat. Why should I eat with you?" The man looked at her cold and even obviously alienated face and remembered her soft tone when she answered the phone just now. He immediately glanced at her coldly. "You can have dinner with Vince, but you can't have dinner with me." Who would have thought that there would be a day when she could hear that Mo Jingshan was calculative in his words? Jin Wan withdrew her gaze and curved her lips, but she was not really smiling. "You've said it yourself. Mr. Vince has helped me through several difficult times in the past 3 years. It's understandable for me to treat him to a meal, but why would I want to have a meal with you? At most, CEO Mo and I will toast each other on social occasions. It's not appropriate for us to have dinner together in private near my company, is it?" Mo Jingshan's hand that had opened the car door paused. He suddenly turned to look at her and closed the door again. Hearing the sound of the car door closing, Jin Wan's heart sank and she instinctively looked at him warily. "Aren't you going to get out of the car? I'll give you 2 choices. Get out of the car to eat, or stay in the car tonight. Choose." The man looked at her cold face and his voice was indifferent as if it really had nothing to do with him. "After all, I'm not the one who's hungry and has a stomachache, and..." Jin Wan, she did have a stomachache, but she didn't want to compromise. But just now, when she saw the car door that she had opened with great difficulty was closed again, it seemed that she had missed the opportunity to escape because of her stubbornness. This man was Mo Jingshan, a man who could make countless rich and powerful people tremble with a casual stomp of his foot. Everyone had to give way to him and didn't dare to provoke him. What else did she have except that she had a relationship with him several years ago? What right did she have to provoke or disobey him? Jin Wan lowered her eyes and said flatly, "CEO Mo, what do you want to eat?" "Anything." It's up to you. He had just come back from a dinner party and drank some wine, so he must have eaten, but generally, he didn't eat too much at this kind of dinner party. As soon as Shenmue drove the car to a beef noodle shop in front of her company, Jinwan said, "Shenmue, park the car here." Shenmue stopped the car decisively. After the car stopped, Jinwan opened the door and got out of the car without saying a word. Then, regardless of whether Mo Jingshan followed her or not, she quickly walked into the beef noodle shop and found an empty seat to sit down. The waiter came over and asked her what she wanted to eat. Jinwan said a bowl of beef noodle. As soon as she finished speaking, she looked up and saw that Mo Jingshan had come in. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, clear, and clean, without any trace of drunkenness. She paused and coldly corrected herself. 2 bowls. It wasn't until the waiter turned and left that Jinwan put down her bag and no longer looked at the man in front of the door. This was a very ordinary beef noodle shop. It was very small, and the tables were not big, but there were many people. The smell of beef noodle wafted in the air, and the environment was relatively clean. With Great Boss Mo's status, he probably rarely came to such a small place, or maybe he had never been here before. The moment Jinwan raised her eyes again, she saw that the man in front of the door had turned his eyes away after looking at the shop. He took long strides and walked in her direction. Chapter 497. When the man's jade-like figure was standing less than 2 meters away from her, he came over and sat down. Mo Jingshan didn't mind this kind of small restaurant at all. He just sat opposite her. For some reason, Jinwan felt that the beef noodle restaurant, which had become narrower because of the crowded people, suddenly became particularly quiet, and the man sitting opposite her was particularly clear. A handsome man with clear and perfect facial features appeared in front of her openly just like that. Mo Jingshan. Jinwan recalled that there was a time when he was really everywhere in her world. As long as she had a little spare time, as long as she slightly let down her guard, he would openly appear in her mind. Later, she gradually got used to the fact that this man had disappeared from her world. She clearly knew that he had completely disappeared from her world. She hadn't even heard of Mo Jingshan's name for a long time before she returned to High City. Before the beef noodle restaurant was served, the waiter came over with a pot of the restaurant's homemade lemonade and poured it into a clean glass. Jinwan didn't speak. Mo Jingshan put the glass of lemonade in front of her. She moved her eyes forward slightly, took the lemonade, and still didn't speak. When the 2 glasses of lemonade were poured, the waiter turned away. Mo Jingshan watched her gently rubbing the glass with her fingers but didn't drink it. He looked at her calmly with his deep eyes. In this small restaurant, it seemed that there was finally a place and space for her to have a good talk with him. "You've grown a lot, but you're still not ruthless enough." The man's voice was light, not high or low, but she could hear every word clearly. Jinwan suddenly seemed to look at him as if she was surprised that he would come to such a conclusion. "What do you mean?" The man's smile deepened, but he still looked at her with clear eyes, and his voice was mixed with a trace of softness that she couldn't understand. "I've been waiting for you to vent your anger and give you a chance to vent your anger, but obviously this time the angle I expected is different." Jinwan felt a little amused and said lightly, "So CEO Mo is just giving me a chance to vent the grievances I suffered in front of you. Do you want me to be happy? The reason why your prediction is a little off is because you think I hate you. But the real reason is that I don't even hate you anymore. I just don't want you anymore." What was the most satisfying thing? "After experiencing these 3 long years, I've finally completely forgotten you. That's the happiest feeling." She paused, and the mockery in her eyes became more obvious. "I don't even want to know why you insisted on divorcing me in the first place. The man had just picked up the glass on the table when he paused for a second or two because of her words. He put the glass down again and his voice was light and emotionless. Really? Jean Wan's cell phone rang again. She took it out of her bag and answered it when she saw it was Xia Tian. Nguyen, are you back to the company now? I'm downstairs. That's great. Last time I asked my SWAT boy to find a bodyguard for you, I've found a suitable person. I'm at home with the baby, so I asked him to go to the company to find you. He went there in the afternoon and learned that you were not in the company, so he has been waiting for you. Where are you now? I'll ask him to go to see you. You really found me a bodyguard. In fact, it's not necessary. I'm quite safe living there now. Since you've already looked for him, why don't you just leave him here? It's better to have a little more security. After all, you're no longer a nobody, and your net worth is already in the Forbes list. You have to be careful of kidnappers or robbers. I'll feel more at ease if you have a bodyguard with you. Jean Wan chuckled. All right, I'm in the beef noodle shop downstairs. Okay, I'll ask him to go there right away. After hanging up the phone, the waiter happened to bring up 2 bowls of beef noodle that had just been made. Jean Wan took a sip of water unhurriedly and said, "This kind of small shop is clean. CEOMO, I hope you don't mind. If you don't like it, just put it down. You don't have to be too polite." Mo Jingshan didn't show any emotion on his face. He very naturally and skillfully put several slices of beef on the noodle shop into Jean Wan's bowl. Jean Wan glanced at the many slices of beef piled up in her bowl. Before she could speak, the door of the noodle shop was opened, and a thin and tall figure appeared in front of the door. It was a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. He had a neat black buzz cut, and his handsome face was a little tough and energetic. He quickly looked around, saw Jean Wan, looked down at the photos he had received on his cell phone, and then fixed his eyes on Jean Wan. Jean Wan's eyelids twitched. Was he the one Xia Tian mentioned? Hi. She came up to the table quickly and greeted Jean Wan. Are you Sister Wan? Jean Wan. Yes, just call me Jean Wan. Sure enough, it's you. The man at the table immediately sat down by Jean Wan's side as if he was very familiar with her. The tables and chairs in this shop were very retro. Jean Wan was sitting on a wooden bench, but because he suddenly sat down, she had to move aside a little to make room for him. Hello, Sister Wan, my name is Yen Gu. I'm an intern in High City's Special Police Force. In fact, I've been on many missions. After 2 years of internship, I can officially become a regular police officer, but I still need about half a year of social practice. Our boss Ling asked me to be a bodyguard for a female CEO, and he said that this female CEO is his wife's best friend, so I came without hesitation. Sister Wan, I'll be working for you from now on. Please take care of me. With that, this young and handsome man called Yen Gu raised his hand to shake Jean Wan's hand. Jean Wan looked at him up and down, asking, How old are you? 23. Yen Gu smiled again. His smile was young and sunny, showing his white teeth. His hand was still raised in front of her, insisting on shaking hands to get to know each other. Since he was 1 year younger than her, it was not too much for him to call her Sister Wan. Jean Wan raised her hand and shook his hand politely. She was about to speak, when Yen Gu looked at the untouched beef noodles on her table and said in surprise, Nowadays, CEOs like you come to this kind of restaurant to eat noodles. Jean Wan, shouldn't you all go to various star hotels to eat luxurious meals? Just like in the TV series. Jean Wan, she coughed. No matter how rich he was still a human. Why couldn't he eat beef noodles? Chapter 498. Hearing this, Yengut smiled again. Yes, I came here at 2:00 in the afternoon, but they said you went out for a meeting and didn't know when you would come back. Anyway, I had nothing to do in the afternoon, so I waited in the lounge downstairs of your company. I didn't expect that you would really come back. This big boy who loved to laugh made her feel less repulsed toward strangers. Furthermore, because he came from the special forces and was full of righteousness, she felt a little closer to him in her heart. This bowl of noodles has just been served. Eat it. Jinwan pushed the bowl of noodles in front of her to Yengu. Yengu looked at her. Isn't this your noodles? Aren't you going to eat it, Sister Nwan? I'm not hungry. If I'm hungry, I'll have another bowl. You eat first. Jinwan picked up disposable sanitary chopsticks and handed them to him. Yengu was a little embarrassed, but he was really hungry. He hesitated and looked at Jinwan. Jinwan blinked at him and said with a smile, I'm on a diet. Hurry up and eat. Hearing that she was on a diet, Yengut smiled again. You girls are so thin, but you still say you want to lose weight every day. I'm really hungry. I'll eat it. Sister Nwan, you also have another bowl. Don't be hungry. Jinwan nodded. Yengu broke the chopsticks, lowered his head, and took a bite. Then he gave her a thumbs up with an admiring look. It tastes good. Really good. Jinwan smiled. Seeing Yengu eat up all the pieces of meat in the noodles without hesitation, she seemed to remember something and looked up at the man sitting opposite her. Mo Jingshan didn't show any emotion on his cold face. He coldly looked at Yengu, who had eaten most of the noodles in a few mouthfuls, and said indifferently, Eat slowly. Don't choke. Yengu suddenly coughed and almost choked. He suddenly put down the chopsticks, looked up at the man sitting opposite him, and paused before turning his eyes to Jinwan. When did this man sit here? Jinwan, Yengu had been looking for Jinwan since he came in and didn't look at anyone else. After sitting down, he didn't look in any other direction, so he didn't notice that there was someone sitting opposite him. Mo Jingshan, who had been treated as an invisible person for a long time, saw him move closer to Jinwan as he spoke, and his cold eyes turned cold. Sister Nwan, who is he? Do you know each other? Seeing his unkind look, Yenji's face immediately turned cold. He leaned closer to Jinwan and asked in a low voice. Cough. Jinwan casually took a few napkins from the table and handed them to Yengu, saying, They're just passers-by sharing a table. Just eat your food. Don't worry about others. Yengu looked at the surrounding tables and saw that all the tables were occupied. Therefore, the reason that passers-by came to share a table was very convincing. Oh. He glanced at the clothes of the man on the other side of the table. He was wearing a black shirt and trousers. They didn't look cheap, and his aura didn't look like that of an ordinary person. Yengu instantly felt a faint sense of worship towards this beef noodle restaurant. Just how delicious was this restaurant? Even two extraordinary people could come here for a meal. After a bowl of noodles, Yengu wiped his mouth with a napkin and called the waiter, Waiter, 2 more bowls. 2 bowls. Jinwan was surprised. I'll have another bowl. You have to have another bowl too. Yengu turned his eyes to her and continued to smile at her, showing his white teeth. These bowls are on me. Sister Nwan, eat as much as you want. The corner of Jinwan's mouth twitched. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. You can eat by yourself. Seeing that she really didn't want to eat, Yengu thought for a while and decided that he couldn't eat 2 more bowls. In the end, he only ordered 1 bowl. Jinwan could understand that a tall and strong young man like him, who had graduated from the special police force, could easily eat 1 or 2 bowls of beef noodle. Besides, Yengu didn't look fat at all. His tall and thin figure was one of the best among his peers. She sat by his side and waited for him to eat the noodles, not disturbing him. However, Jinwan spoke to him with a smile and patiently handed him a napkin, all of which fell into Mo Jingshan's eyes. Jinwan glanced at the bowl of noodles in front of Mo Jingshan. The noodles had been left here for more than 10 minutes and had become sticky. She glanced at him again, asking him why he hadn't eaten it yet. Mo Jingshan's lips curved into a cold smile. After Yengu ate most of the second bowl of noodles, he asked the waiter for a bottle of mineral water, took a sip, and put it down. He turned his eyes to Jinwan, saying, "Sister Nwan, I'll be working for you from now on, right? Is this the first time you've hired a bodyguard? Have you ever had a bodyguard by your side before? My job is to keep you safe, isn't it?" Jinwan thought of Fengling, and the smile in her eyes softened. "I used to have a female bodyguard by my side, but she's abroad now. I don't think she'll come back anytime soon." "A female bodyguard? How's her martial arts?" "She won the Women's Close Combat Championship in the United States and is a shooting coach in some special bases." "What do you think of her martial arts?" Jinwan asked with a smile. Yengu nodded. "Then I see. Sister Nwan, don't worry. I'm good at martial arts. I can definitely keep you safe." Jinwan looked at his serious face and then at the noodles in his hand. She chuckled. "Why is your name Yengu? I think it should be Yengu. Hurry up and eat your noodles. Let's talk about work tomorrow." Seeing that Jinwan was not a cold and unapproachable boss, Yengu continued to eat a big mouthful of noodles in a good mood and didn't continue to talk. At this time, Shenmu came in from outside. He came to Mo Jingshan's side and said something in a low voice. It seemed that he had something to do. Mo Jingshan took a look at Jinwan and Yengu, who was still eating noodles. His eyes darkened, he silently threw the bill on the table, and indifferently got up to leave. As soon as the man left, Jinwan's eyes fell on the bill on the table. In the past, Mo Jingshan rarely carried money with him. He had to pay by credit card to accompany her to buy groceries. She didn't expect that now he had the habit of carrying money with him. Habit. Habit was a terrible thing. She had just quit it for a year or two, so she didn't want to be stained with it again. The door of the beef noodle restaurant opened and closed. Jinwan picked up the glass and took a sip of water, remaining silent. After eating the noodles, Yengu looked up at the 100 yuan on the table and said in surprise, "This passerby is really fastidious. Is this his treat? Are all the bosses so generous now? We just share a table. How can he take the initiative to treat us?" Jinwan, but why hasn't his bowl of noodles been touched? Hey! Didn't the waiter check the noodles when he brought them up? Why isn't there any meat in his bowl? Chapter 499. A week later, Jinwan was about to go out of the company in the afternoon to talk about a new project with room for development in China, when she suddenly received a call. The call was from the Mo family. She learned that a few days ago, Grandfather Mo suddenly fainted at home because of heart palpitations caused by high blood pressure and was rushed to the hospital. It took him more than a day to get out of danger. After staying in the hospital for a few days, he was discharged from the hospital and returned to the Mo family yesterday. But Grandfather Mo was now recuperating in bed at home, clamoring to see Jinwan every day when he woke up. Uncle O, the housekeeper, was worried that Grandfather Mo's bad mood would affect his health, so he called Jinwan, hoping that she could spare some time to go to the Mo family these days to see Grandfather Mo. As soon as she heard that Grandfather Mo was in a coma and hospitalized, Jean Wan stood up from the sofa. Then she heard that Grandfather Mo was still recuperating at home these days and could not walk by himself, clamoring to see her every day. Without saying a word, she postponed all her afternoon schedule, asked Yen Gu to help her go to a nearby pharmacy to buy various expensive herbs and supplements for lowering blood pressure, and then drove all the way to the Mo family. 3 years ago, Jean Wan avoided seeing Grandfather Mo. The only person she felt guilty about was Grandfather Mo. Grandfather Mo's words were still ringing in her ears. He had always kept the position of the Mo family's granddaughter-in-law for her. She thought that after 3 years, Grandfather Mo should have let it go and no longer be so persistent, but she didn't expect that he would often talk about her and miss her in his illness. Sometimes people were like this. They often felt that no one would disappear in their lives, until one day they found that the person accompanying them was getting older and closer to the end of his life. When they tried to hold on to this person again, they found that they couldn't be held back. Grandfather Mo was already in his 80s. Unlike young people like them, he couldn't stand the ravages of time. Jean Wan couldn't help speeding up, and the guilt and regret in her heart grew stronger. 3 years ago, she should have at least seen him before leaving. She could be ruthless to anyone and anything, but to Grandfather Mo, she really shouldn't have been so heartless. Sister Wan, there's a speed limit here. Drive slowly. If you are too worried, why don't you sit here and I'll drive? Yen Gu sat in the co-driver's seat and saw Jean Wan driving almost 100 on a road with a speed limit of 60. Although there were not many cars on the road and it was not dangerous, he could see that she seemed to be in a bad mood. It's fine. I just want to hurry over to see Grandfather Mo, Jean Wan said as she increased the speed of the car, completely ignoring the speed limit signs. Uncle O said with a kind smile, Mr. Mo happens to be here. He just went to see Grandpa Mo take his medicine and will come back in a minute. Yen Gu stood beside Jean Wan, carrying a lot of expensive herbs and tonics in his hand, but after listening for a long time, he felt a little strange. What Mrs. Mo? Wasn't Sister Wan single? She had never seen any man around her. Why did this old man call her Mrs. Mo? I'll wait for Grandpa Mo to wake up. Jean Wan didn't decide whether to stay here or not. If Mo Jingshan was not here, she might consider staying at the Mo family for one night. After all, she just came back to see Grandpa Mo, but if Mo Jingshan was here, she'd better not stay here. After all, there was no reason for her to stay here. With that, she turned back, took the things in Yen Ji's hand, and handed them to Uncle O. No matter whether the Mo family lacked these things or not, this was the etiquette for the younger generation to visit the old. Uncle O was used to it. He took the things and didn't say anything but just asked Jean Wan to hurry to the front hall to sit down and drink tea and rest for a while. Yen Gu followed Jean Wan to the front hall. Seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be very familiar with the environment here, he couldn't help asking, Sister Wan, who is the Mr. Mo that Uncle O just mentioned? And who is Mrs. Mo? Did he call the wrong person? In the front yard of the Mo family, in the Chinese-style attic where Grandpa Mo was sleeping, the window was bright. The man's figure stood in front of the window, silently watching the woman walking through the shade of the trees in the front yard of the Mo family's house, and then coldly glanced at the overly enthusiastic bodyguard beside her. The bodyguard that Xia Tian tried to find for her. He must have deliberately come to annoy him. Chapter 500. She pushed open the window, and a gust of wind brought the woman's voice over. Yes, Uncle O, you called the wrong person. There's no Mrs. Mo here. Jean Wan sat in the front hall for a while, chatting with Uncle O from time to time. When she saw Mo Pylon passing through the back door, she took a look at her. Mo Pylon obviously didn't expect to see Jean Wan in the Mo family after a few years. She glanced at Jean Wan and her face darkened. Then she turned and walked away. Why is Aunt here? Jean Wan remembered that Grandfather Mo had said that he had driven away all the relatives who wanted to be related to the Mo family in a fit of anger. Logically speaking, among those who were driven away, Aunt Mo Pylon should be the first to bear the brunt, but now she actually saw her in the Mo family. Uncle O shook his head and sighed. You don't know. She has been living with the Mo family for some time with her daughter, Mo Joshua. Grandpa Mo is getting old, and he is not as healthy as he used to be. He doesn't have a daughter, so he needs someone to take care of him. Alas, 2 years ago, Mo Joshua married a bank owner. Originally, she thought that she could become rich and powerful. However, the man spent all day drinking and having a lot of women. In the end, she still ended up with a divorce. Joshua followed the same path as her mother. She got divorced not long after she got married. Fortunately, she didn't get pregnant, so she didn't live alone with a child for more than 20 years like her mother. Now the mother and daughter have no one to rely on. Mo Pylon is old and has not been able to find a good backer. Joshua is only 27 years old, but after all, no matter who she finds, it will be her second marriage. Both mother and daughter are proud and arrogant people. It's not easy for them to find someone they like. Seeing them staying at the Mo family's house all day, Master Mo knew that they had nowhere to go. He pitied them and felt pity for them. For the sake of their old friendship, he didn't drive them away and let them stay. Jean Wan nodded. Grandpa Mo doesn't have a daughter. It's good to have a niece to take care of him. Uncle O smiled. Although the old master is old, he is still soft-hearted. Mo Pylon and Mo Joshua have been living here for the past 2 years, so we let them live here. Dutiful. Jean Wan recalled that when she suddenly saw Mo Pylon just now, this aunt's originally peaceful eyes suddenly seemed to be pierced with thorns, as if she was facing a formidable enemy, as if Jean Wan's sudden appearance here would occupy her territory. Everyone in the Mo family knew about Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan's divorce. She just came back to visit Grandfather Mo, but from Mo Pylon's expression just now, it was clear that she didn't intend to play her part. 2 hours later, it was already 5:30 in the evening. It was dinner time, and the kitchen was preparing dinner. Elder Mo had also woken up. After hearing that Jean Wan had come to the Mo family, he was so excited that he immediately got out of bed. However, fearing that the smell of medicine on this bedridden old man would be too strong, he specially changed his clothes before heading to the front hall. The door of the front hall was opened by Uncle O, and a handsome man pushed Grandfather Mo in a wheelchair. The man behind the wheelchair was noble and indifferent, and his deep, dark eyes were like 2 bottomless pools of ink. Jean Wan is here, isn't she? The moment Jean Wan heard the voice, she abruptly stood up, deliberately avoiding the man's gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, she saw Elder Mo. When she saw that the elder was actually sitting in a wheelchair, her nose immediately turned sour. She forced a smile. Grandfather Mo didn't care whether Jean Wan called him grandfather or Grandfather Mo. He just stared at her with a smile. He was sitting in an automatic wheelchair with a button. After being pushed into the front hall by Mo Jingshan, he could walk on the ground autonomously. He pressed the button and approached Jean Wan. Jean Wan was afraid that Grandfather Mo and the wheelchair would hit the corner of the table and chair in the front hall, so she hurriedly stepped forward, pressed the armrest of the wheelchair, and leaned over to Grandfather Mo to say, "Grandfather Mo, I'm here. Don't worry. There are all kinds of sandalwood tables and chairs you like here. They are very strong. It hurts if you touch the corner of the table. Be careful." As she spoke, she directly pushed the old man's wheelchair to the front where there were fewer tables and chairs. The old man was in an extremely good mood and couldn't restrain his excitement. He took her hand and placed it in his palm. He patted her hand with his other hand and said emotionally, "Child, you've been gone for 3 years. Do you really think this old man can live so long and leave home for so many years as I please?" It was a divorce, but she turned it into running away from home. It was as if Jean Wan had never really left home. Sure enough, Grandfather Mo was considerate. Jean Wan smiled softly. "Grandfather Mo, let alone 3 years, it's common to see people in their hundreds now. It's not a problem for you to live for another 30 years. Humph, you're such a sweet girl. If I live for another 30 years, I'll be an old monster." Grandfather Mo snorted at her like a child. Jean Wan immediately smiled. Jean Wan immediately smiled. Her hand was still held by the old man, but she didn't rush to withdraw it. She just patiently leaned over the wheelchair and said softly, "A few days ago, I heard from Uncle O that you fainted because of high blood pressure. Fortunately, it's just high blood pressure. Remember to drink less and eat less greasy high-calorie food in the future. Eat more light dishes." "Do you think I have high blood pressure just because I drink a little wine and eat good food?" Grandfather Mo snorted again and held Jean Wan's hand tightly. "I know you've come back to China, but you haven't come to see me. I'm so angry." Jean Wan was embarrassed. The old man rolled his eyes at her and harumphed. "Look at you. Back then, you and Jingshan were so close and inseparable. In the end, you didn't even tell me about the divorce. Back then, I waited for you downstairs at your company for so long, but you refused to see me. Do you know how sad I was at the time?" Jean Wan lowered her eyes. Grandfather Mo, seeing that Jean Wan didn't want to mention what happened 3 years ago, Grandfather Mo let go of her hand and sighed. "Forget it. You didn't want to see me at that time because you didn't dare to. Anyway, I vented my anger on Jingshan, and he was beaten by me several times. At least you returned to China safely, so I won't mention it." Chapter 501. There were a lot of people present, and there were many servants of the Mo family around. It was not convenient for Jean Wan to ask them anything, so she withdrew her gaze and pushed Grandpa Mo to the dining table to sit down. "Grandpa, don't be so hot-tempered. Don't always be angry with us young people. You'd better take care of yourself." Jean Wan helped Grandpa Mo to the dining table and gestured to the servant to serve the dishes. Just now, the kitchen had prepared dinner and had been waiting for Grandpa Mo. Jean Wan thought that Mo Pilin and her mother would come for dinner, but the helper went to call for them and came back alone, saying, "They said that they ate something in the afternoon and aren't hungry. They won't be coming for dinner tonight." Grandpa Mo didn't say much but just smiled and asked Jean Wan to sit next to him. Grandpa Mo always liked to drink a few mouthfuls of wine at dinner. Now he had not recovered, so he couldn't drink, but he really wanted to drink, so Uncle O planned to bring a jar of the Mo family's old medicinal wine for Grandpa Mo to drink. The medicinal wine was good for his body, so he could drink a few mouthfuls. Jean Wan was not in a hurry to sit down. She avoided Grandpa Mo's dark eyes and quickly followed Uncle O out to help him. Seeing Jean Wan follow him out, Uncle O picked up a jar of medicinal wine with a smile and said, "How heavy is such a small jar of wine? I can carry it myself. Why do you suddenly follow me out? Do you have something to ask me?" Jean Wan smiled. "Uncle O, I'm really here to help." Uncle O smiled and didn't say more. As he walked back with her, he said, "I know what you want to ask. 3 years ago, Grandpa Mo didn't see you. After you flew to London, Mr. Mo didn't explain what happened between you and him. He just said that it was his decision to divorce you and that you were forced to leave, so it was not your fault. Even if he was heartless to the Mo family, it was not your fault. In a fit of anger, Elder Mo raised his walking stick and hit Mr. Mo. All the hits landed squarely on his back. That walking stick was made of redwood. It was hard and sturdy, but it broke in the end. How hard do you think he hit him? Jean Wan's footsteps suddenly stopped. At that time, I was watching from the side. I couldn't stop him even if I wanted to. The old man was in a fit of anger and Mr. Mo took all the blame. He just stood there without saying a word or dodging. The old man raised his walking stick and smashed it against his back, but Mr. Mo didn't even frown. In the end, the walking stick broke and the old man sat down angrily. When Mr. Mo left, I saw that the back of his shirt was soaked. Even if it wasn't to the extent that his skin was torn, it definitely wasn't any better. Jean Wan lowered her eyes, and her heart seemed to be stung by something. Mo Jingshan's back was covered with old wounds from Cambodia and Los Angeles. Even if the wounds had already healed, they couldn't withstand that kind of devastation. 3 years ago, it had only been a few months since his wounds had healed. Grandfather Mo had hit him on the back with his walking stick, and those especially serious old wounds had most likely burst open. His shirt was soaked, which meant that his wounds had really burst open from the beating. That kind of pain that connected the bones and flesh, just by imagining it, one could imagine how painful it was. Uncle O sighed again. Ever since he was a child, the old man has never beaten him, but for you, he broke his crutch directly. Alas, Jean Wan stopped outside the front hall. That was all Uncle O could say. He thought about it and didn't say anything more. He didn't urge her to go in but walked into the front hall alone with a jar of wine in his hand. Jean Wan was a little confused. Mo Jingshan of the past was reflected in her eyes. He had said that trust was the foundation of marriage. He had said that he would never divorce her. But in the end, he had pushed her away and said that the Mo Jingshan who had promised her everything was already dead. So he was no longer the man she believed in love with, no longer the man who could risk his life for her, and no longer the man who broke his vows to kill for her in Cambodia. He said he had died in that car accident. Even though she knew it was false, she gradually convinced herself that it was true in the following 3 years. She just thought that he was a man with the same face as the old Mo Jingshan. That was all. But Uncle O told her that 3 years ago, after she left, Mo Jingshan was beaten by the old man and admitted that he forced her to leave. Jean Wan looked at the brightly lit front hall. At this time, Yen Gu came back from outside. Seeing Jean Wan standing outside like a statue, he raised his hand and waved it in front of her eyes. Sister Wan. What are you daydreaming about? Why are you standing outside? To feed the mosquitoes. Jean Wan returned to herself and glanced at him. Where did you go earlier? I went to the entrance of the Mo's mansion to take a look and familiarize myself with the environment outside. If anything happens here, I can take you away at any time. Isn't this the duty of a bodyguard? What could possibly happen to me here? It's very safe in the Mo residence. You don't have to familiarize yourself with the surroundings. Rest for a while. Ah. Are you really familiar with this place? Are you really Mrs. Mo? Aren't you single, Sister Wan? The corner of Jean Wan's mouth twitched. She pushed him back into the front hall and told him to hurry up to eat. The tall young man with a crew cut let out a cry of ouch and finally went in. Jean Wan glanced inside and turned to walk down the stairs in front of the front hall. Her heart was stuffy and she wanted to take a walk outside to get some fresh air. As soon as she went around to the shade behind the front hall, she suddenly heard someone talking. The voice seemed familiar. Jean Wan paused and instinctively stood behind a thick tree trunk. Did you see that? That Jean Wan is really back. I thought she had nothing to do with the Mo family. I didn't expect that she would come as soon as the old man was discharged from the hospital. Mo Pailan's voice was very low. Did you see her outside the front hall just now? The old man kept holding Jean Wan's hand as if she were his granddaughter-in-law. Mom, did you drag me out to peep just to see Jean Wan? Mo Joshua's voice was low, and she still sounded quiet, timid, and self-abased. Chapter 502. But, when I went to help feed Grandpa the medicine this morning, Jingshan didn't even look at me. I didn't dare. Mo Joshua lowered her head. Alas, you silly girl. Mo Pailan patted her on the head exasperatedly. Instead of relying on your own ability to marry Mo Jingshan, you might as well count on something else. You're really going to piss me off. Mo Joshua felt wronged and didn't speak. Mo Pailan raised her hand to touch her hair, looked at her face for a while, and then said, Do you still have the pajamas I bought for you last time? Yes, in the cabinet. Okay, we'll play it by ear tonight. Listen to me, and I'll find a way for you to be Mrs. Mo's wife. Even if you can't be Mrs. Mo's wife legitimately, at least you have to be pregnant with Mo's child. In this way, we can live here safely. Mom, what on earth do you want to do? Don't worry about it. Just listen to me tonight. Anyway, we can't let Jean Wan come back and abuse her power. After saying that, Mo Pailan dragged Mo Joshua along the other side of the path and walked back. While walking, she whispered something to her daughter. When the mother and daughter were far away, Jean Wan came out from behind the tree and glanced in that direction. Jean Wan even had a ridiculous thought. Was this aunt going to let her daughter rape Mo Jingshan so that she could continue to live a happy life in the Mo family? Even if Mo Pailan had this idea, Mo Joshua was so timid that she didn't even dare to raise her head in front of Mo Jingshan. How could she do it? He was the president of Shine Group with an international reputation, but he was reduced to the point where the mother and daughter wanted to rape him and have a child. Well, she could only express her sympathy perfunctorily. When she returned to the front hall, she wanted to say something, but she didn't know whether to remind him or to ridicule him. But all this was disrupted by Yan Gu. Yan Gu had been staring at Mo Jingshan since he entered the door. Uncle O knew this young man was Jean Wan's bodyguard, so he let him in, but why was he so surprised to see Mr. Mo as if he had seen a ghost? Originally, Yan Gu wanted to sit down, but Mo Jingshan stared at him without saying a word. Just his gaze made him feel as though he was sitting on pins and needles. He stood there for a long time but did not sit down. When Jean Wan came back, Yan Gu turned around, walked behind Jean Wan, and whispered, Sister Wan, this man looks very familiar. Is he the passerby who treated us to beef noodles that day? The corners of Jean Wan's eyes twitched. She had almost forgotten about this matter. She mumbled, Damn, what's going on? Wasn't he just a passerby? Why did you meet? I'll explain to you later. Jean Wan walked in, looked straight at Grandfather Mo, and walked towards him. When she passed by Mo Jingshan's seat, Grandfather Mo was about to ask her to sit there, but before he could speak, Jean Wan quickly bypassed him and sat down on the chair next to him. She was going to ask Yan Gu to eat with her, but after all, this was the Mo family, and Grandfather Mo was still here, so Jean Wan couldn't make the decision. Uncle O came up to Yan Gu, who was still stunned, and said politely, Young man, there is a spare small dining room in the front hall. You can take a rest on the sofa there after dinner. What do you want to eat? We'll ask the kitchen to send it to you after it's done. Although Yan Gu was a little impulsive, he knew the rules. He waved his hand at Jean Wan, telling her not to worry about him, and then turned to follow Uncle O. He successfully escaped from the man's piercing eyes. Jean Wan didn't know what to do. Jean Wan glanced at the crutch next to Grandfather Mo's wheelchair. She didn't pay much attention to it when she pushed him here, but after chatting with Uncle O, she couldn't help looking at the crutch. Grandfather Mo, is your crutch new? I heard that the crutch you used to use was made of redwood, which you like very much. It has been used for many years. Why do you suddenly change it? Jean Wan asked with a smile. As soon as she finished speaking, Mo Jingshan got up and said flatly, I'll take a call. With that, he glanced at Grandfather Mo coldly, and his eyes were chilling. Then he turned and walked away, his back straight and steady, unhurried. There was a silence in the dining room, but Jean Wan was still looking at Grandfather Mo. Grandfather Mo calmed down and took a look at Jean Wan. Did Uncle O tell you about the crutch? Jean Wan didn't speak, but her eyes showed that she acquiesced. Just pretend that you don't know. Just now, Mo Jingshan's attitude was very clear, and Grandfather Mo didn't go overboard with his words. He reached out to pick up the wine. Grandfather Mo, although this is medicinal wine, you'd better not drink it. It's better not to drink wine when you have high blood pressure. Jean Wan didn't continue to ask but took the initiative to pour some wine for Grandfather Mo, but only a little, much less than if he had poured it himself. Seeing that Jean Wan was really doing this for his own good, Grandfather Mo said with a smile, Okay, I'll listen to you. Girl G, stay at home tonight. I'll ask Jingshan to send you back tomorrow morning. No, I drove here by myself. I'll leave after dinner with you. Just stay. I'll ask the servant to arrange another room for you. If you leave as soon as you arrive, I'm afraid I'll be too angry to sleep tonight. If I get sick again because I don't sleep well, you'll have to spend time with me in the hospital, won't you? Grandfather Mo said and glared at her, making it clear that she had to stay here tonight. Otherwise, he would definitely lose his temper. He couldn't lose his temper because of his illness. He had to be in a good mood. If Jean Wan didn't see Grandfather Mo, she might be able to avoid him as ruthlessly as she did 3 years ago, but now Grandfather Mo was in front of her, and he still treated her as if she was his only granddaughter-in-law. Jean Wan really couldn't bear it. That night, Jean Wan stayed in the suite in the villa behind the Mo family, and Yen Guo was taken to a suitable room by Uncle O to rest. After entering the room, Jean Wan didn't go to take a shower as usual. Instead, she sat in front of the window, holding a cup of scented tea made by the servant in her hand and looking down. She didn't put down the cup until she saw Mo Joshua appear. Chapter 503. When she arrived at the door of the villa, Mo Joshua couldn't control the strange heat in her body at all. She walked in a trance. Just now, Mo Pylon insisted that she drink a bowl of white fungus lotus seed soup before going to bed, but after drinking it, she brought her another bowl, saying that she should change into a nightgown and bring it to Mo Jingshan in person. At first, Mo Joshua didn't understand, but when she felt the strange heat in her body, she roughly understood what she meant. Since she was a child, Mo Joshua did not have her own opinions and always listened to her mother. She had been like this since she was a child, but she had seen some novels and movies when she was in school. Now she guessed that Mo Pylon must have drugged her, and she also guessed that the bowl she was going to send to Mo Jingshan should also contain that drug. Although Mo Joshua didn't have the courage to feed this to Mo Jingshan, she couldn't refuse now, not to mention that she had a crush on Mo Jingshan since she was a child. After entering the villa, Mo Joshua carefully went upstairs with the bowl, came to Mo Jingshan's door, raised her hand, and gently knocked on the door. She knocked for a while, but no one answered. Mo Joshua continued to knock on the door. She remembered that her mother had told her not to say anything before opening the door. If he heard her voice, he might not even open the door. Therefore, she didn't say anything. However, the heat in her body made her feel uncomfortable all over. Her legs were so weak that she couldn't stand it anymore. She simply leaned against the door weakly and kept knocking on the door with her hand. The moment the door was finally opened, Mo Joshua hurriedly took a step back. Her face was flushed. She carefully raised the bowl in her hand and shyly looked at the expressionless man inside the door. In the villa, it was quiet for a long time, and no sound was heard. Jean Wan had suspected from the beginning that Mo Pylon had drugged her daughter and then asked Mo Joshua to put something in her daughter's supper. Then she sent her daughter there with her supper just like that. From their conversation, Jean Wan thought it was probably so. Just now, when she saw Mo Joshua's face, she also felt that she must have been drugged. In the middle of the night, Mo Jingshan should have guessed it. Based on his vigilance and his attitude toward the mother and daughter, if he didn't use some tricks, Mo Joshua might not even be able to knock on his door. But she sat in front of the window and watched for a long time, only to see Mo Pylon walking back and forth sneakily downstairs. Seeing that Mo Joshua hadn't come out after entering the villa for so long, Mo Pylon's face gradually became joyful. Jean Wan gradually felt a little strange. This shouldn't be the case. Could it be that even Mo Jingshan would fall for such a clumsy trick? She watched for a while longer and saw that Mo Pylon had already gone to the door of the villa. She seemed to be guarding the door on purpose, not wanting to be disturbed by other servants. Jean Wan paused for a moment, got up and was about to go out, but then she hesitated and picked up her cell phone to call Uncle O, but his cell phone was turned off. She guessed that he had gone to bed because it was too late. Jean Wan could only walk out quickly. As soon as she arrived at the door of the villa, she walked in without saying a word. What are you doing? Mo Pylon was guarding the door. Seeing that Jean Wan was going to force her way in, she quickly came over and gave Jean Wan a push. However, not only was Jean Wan not pushed away, but Mo Pylon was pushed back a few steps by Jean Wan's quick movement. She almost lost her balance and staggered before glaring at Jean Wan. Hiss, you're quite strong. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Jean Wan coldly raised her eyes and looked at her. I just came out of the villa across the street. Why? Can't I enter this villa? Of course not. You and Jingshan have divorced. This is Jingshan's place. Why did you go in so late at night? Really? The smile in Jean Wan's beautiful eyes was slightly cold, but Mo Pylon couldn't help shivering in the summer. Then who can enter? Your daughter. Jean Wan smiled, getting straight to the point. What are you talking about? My daughter. Joshua is sleeping soundly in the room. I suddenly have something to talk to Jingshan about. I don't know if he is resting now, so I stood here for a while. Jean Wan, I warn you, don't talk nonsense in the Mo family. You are no longer the granddaughter-in-law of the Mo family. No one can support you. Just stay here for one night and leave. Why are you everywhere? Aunt, since we're talking about the Mo family, you should know what you can and can't do. It's already good enough that you're able to stay in the Mo family just because the elder is soft-hearted. Right now, if you're bold enough to go against Mo Jingshan's gun, are you sure the two of you can bear the consequences? Jean Wan's smile was cold. Mo Pylon sneered and still refused to admit her mistake. I don't understand what you're talking about. After all, you are not a member of the Mo family now. The Mo family is not a place where you can go wherever you want. Anyway, you can't enter Jingshan's place. Go. With that, she stood in front of the door and raised her arm to block the door. Jean Wan coldly looked at her, glanced at the quiet villa, and raised her eyes to look upstairs. The lights were still on, but she could not see anyone. Mo Joshua had been in the room for so long. In fact, Jean Wan also hesitated. Was it necessary for her to meddle in this kind of business? What if Mo Jingshan was willing to fall into this trap? What if she went in to stop him now and interrupted him? Even though Jean Wan knew Mo Jingshan was not such a person, it seemed that she really had no reason to stop him. Mo Pailan seemed to notice Jean Wan's hesitation and immediately sneered. Jean Wan, take a look at yourself. The Mo family has nothing to do with you. It's just that the elder misses you. That's why he asked you to come over for a meal and stay for a night. Tomorrow, won't you still part ways with him? You are no longer a member of the Mo family. Just look at yourself and keep your place. Why are you meddling in other people's business? Seeing that Mo Pailan didn't want to leave, Jean Wan looked calm, but her heart was inexplicably agitated. She glanced down at the time. She calculated and found that Mo Joshua had been in the room for at least 20 minutes. If Mo Jingshan wanted to drive her away, he would have done so long ago. Why did he need her, an outsider, to come here? Thinking of this, Jean Wan frowned, didn't speak, and turned to leave. Chapter 504. Seeing where Jean Wan was looking, Mo Pailan hurriedly clenched the thing in her hand tighter and hid her hands behind her back. Jean Wan smiled and then her smile cooled down. She came up to her. Aunt, you're so thoughtful. You're afraid that he won't eat that bowl of food, so you asked Mo Joshua to rub this aphrodisiac on her body in advance. Mo Pailan's eyes panicked. What nonsense are you talking about? Jean Wan was young and had never had contact with people in the black market. How could she know about this thing? Jean Wan smiled. You probably don't know where this thing is made. When I was in London, my business competitor had a company that specialized in making these kinds of sex toys. These things are very popular abroad and can be seen in some drugstores near bars. You can only buy them in China through the black market. Do you think I haven't seen them? At the moment when Mo Pailan froze, Jean Wan suddenly turned around and walked in quickly. When Mo Pailan came back to herself and was about to reach out to stop her, Jean Wan had successfully crossed her line of defense and broke in smoothly. What are you doing? Come out. Seeing Jean Wan going upstairs quickly in a pair of indoor slippers, Mo Pailan hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Jean Wan's clothes, reached out to pull her back and stepped on the slippers under her feet. She couldn't let Jean Wan go up and ruin her daughter's plan. Jean Wan paused because of her feet and looked coldly at Mo Pailan's clenched teeth. She was in a hurry when she went downstairs just now, so she just put on a pair of slippers. She glanced at the smooth and shiny marble floor of the villa, including the stairs which were also made of smooth marble. She simply threw off the slippers on her feet, and at the same time, waved Mo Pailan's arm away, and quickly walked up again. Stop! Mo Pailan did not expect that although Jean Wan looked so thin, she was actually so strong and nimble. She was in her 50s, and she could barely stand still. She rushed up, panting. When Jean Wan had successfully reached the second floor, Mo Pailan suddenly made up her mind and grabbed Jean Wan's hair. When Jean Wan paused because of the pain, Mo Pailan took the opportunity to reach out her hands and choke her hard. Her eyes were red as she strangled her and glared at her. Don't you dare ruin my daughter's plan. I'm telling you. From today onwards, my daughter can't just follow my surname. I want her to truly become a member of the Mo family. Jean Wan, you can forget about having anything to do with Jingshin in this lifetime. Strangled so hard and almost pushed down the stairs by her sudden brute force, Jean hurriedly raised her hand to grab the handrail on the stairs to steady herself. Looking up at Mo Pylan's almost crazy expression, Jean sneered and suddenly raised her other hand to grab Mo Pylan's wrist. Mo Pylan felt a sudden pain and numbness in her wrist. Before she could react, Jean suddenly grabbed both of Mo Pylan's hands, and in the blink of an eye, Jean turned the one who had been strangled into herself. Jean looked deadpan at Mo Pylan, who was suddenly thrown away, put a little force on her wrist, and saw Mo Pylan's pale and incredulous expression in pain. "You?" Mo Pylan stared at her blankly, completely unable to understand how Jean suddenly broke free from her and then restrained her. "If it weren't for the title of an elder, I would have slapped you so hard that you wouldn't even remember your surname." As Jean finished speaking, she suddenly loosened her hand, and Mo Pylan immediately staggered back and sat on the ground unprepared. Jean turned and walked quickly toward Mo Jingshan's room. Seeing that Jean had walked over, Mo Pylan struggled to sit up from the ground, stroked her waist that was almost broken from the fall, pounced on Jean and pressed her against the door. She raised her hand to cover Jean mouth so that she wouldn't disturb the people in the room. Jean didn't expect that Mo Pylan would really use all kinds of dirty tricks in order to stay in the Mo family, nor did she expect that she could still be so strong at this time. Mo Pylan tugged at the clothes on Jean shoulders to drag her away. As the two were tearing at each other, the ring on Mo Pylan's finger left a red mark on Jean neck. This time, Jean was in so much pain that she no longer cared about her aunt's face and slapped her hard. Mo Pylan was slapped so hard that she took a step back. The left side of her face hurt so much that she was stunned. Jean face was cold, and she said word by word coldly, "It's disgusting for someone so old to be so shameless." "You?" Jean leaned against the door. The pain on her neck made her frown unhappily. She raised her hand and rubbed her neck. Sure enough, there was blood. "Even if you're stupid, there should be a limit. Do you think you can survive in the Mo family after tonight?" Mo Pylan's eyes were red. She put down the hand covering her face and rushed up to strangle Jean neck again, as if she wouldn't stop until she strangled Jean to death. As soon as she rushed over, Jean was thrown against the door. All of a sudden, the door behind Jean was opened without warning. She instantly lost her balance and fell backward. The man in the door caught her just in time, and she fell into a familiar embrace. Jean stiffened. She raised her eyes to see the man whose eyes were clear and not affected by the drug at all. At the same time, he was neatly dressed and handsome. Before she could react, the man's arm circled around her waist and brought her into his arms. Seeing the door open, Mo Pylan's red eyes froze. She stared blankly at Mo Jingshan, who didn't show any signs of intimacy and even acted as if nothing had happened. "You?" "Jingshan." Mo Pylan's eyes immediately panicked. She wanted to look into the room to see where Mo Joshua was. Jean also looked at Mo Jingshan, and the tense string in her mind immediately loosened. She asked with a straight face, "Are you all right?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the obvious red mark on her neck, which was still seeping with a faint trace of blood. He coldly narrowed his eyes, hiding all his emotions. He held her in his arms without letting go, asking softly, "How did you get hurt?" Only then did Jean remember the wound on her neck. At the same time, she returned to herself and rushed to struggle out of his arms. However, the man's arm was firmly circled around her waist. Chapter 505. As Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at the wound on Jean neck, he glanced at her feet that were stepping on the cold floor. His voice was light with some displeasure. "You're not wearing shoes. Are you complaining that your body is not cold enough?" Jean Wan lowered her eyes to look at her own feet. Under the man's gaze, her toes could not help but curl up. It was not that she was not wearing slippers. It was just that it was inconvenient for her to walk in them after being stepped on by Mo Pylon, so she decided to take them off at the stairs. Then she heard the man's cold voice with a hint of a smile. "There is a fire escape on the second floor of the villa that leads to the back door. I only told Mo Joshua one sentence. If she dares to take a single step into my room tonight, I'm afraid there will no longer be a place for the two of you in this huge Haiching." His words were directed at Mo Pylon. Jean Wan immediately raised her eyes to look at Mo Pylon, whose face had instantly paled. "You." Mo Pylon's eyes were flustered. There was indeed more than one door in this villa. Earlier, she was guarding the front door, thinking that it would be fine as long as she did not allow anyone to enter and disturb them. However, she neglected to consider whether Mo Joshua would escape from the back. "Although your daughter doesn't have her own opinions, she understands the stakes better than you. Compared to bringing that bowl of soup through my door and incurring my disgust, at least she knows when to advance and when to retreat." Mo Jingshan's voice was extremely light. Mo Pylon's gaze met his cold, thin smile. She wanted to say something but paused. No, she had to find Joshua and clarify things. Before she left, she suddenly glanced at Jean Wan with a cold and mocking smile. "Aren't you guys already divorced?" After finishing her words, under Jean Wan's even stiffer expression, she rushed to the back door. She pushed open the back door and saw that the bowl of white fungus soup had indeed been smashed on the ground. She immediately trembled in anger. This damn brat. However, the moment Mo Pylon left, she rushed to struggle out of Mo Jingshan's embrace. The man only lowered his eyes to glance at her expression. Without speaking, he directly carried her into the door, and slammed it shut with a bang. The moment she was abruptly carried into the room, the familiar surroundings caused Jean Wan's hair to stand on end. This was not Mo Jingshan's room alone. 3 years ago, when they were still lovey-dovey, this was the room they had stayed in together. The past was still vivid in her mind. She pushed him hard with both hands, but the man directly carried her onto the bed. The moment her body touched the bed, she immediately jumped up. "Don't move." Mo Jingshan glanced at the wound on her neck. As he picked up his phone, he asked coldly, "Was it scratched by your nails?" Jean Wan did not answer. She raised her hand to touch the place on her neck that was still faintly aching. However, before she could touch it, the man abruptly grabbed her wrist. She didn't know who had called, but he said, "Mo at Shin, G Nwan at G." Jean Wan was about to shake his hand off when she heard the man speak into the phone, "Send the first aid kit over." After finishing his words, he tossed the phone aside and glanced at Jean Wan's toes, which were curled up by the bed due to her tense emotions. He watched her for a while with a deep gaze. Seeing that she was still coldly avoiding his gaze, he couldn't help but chuckle. Hearing the man's chuckle, Jean Wan abruptly raised her eyes to glare at him. "What are you laughing at? You didn't sleep this late and ran here barefoot. You're worried about me, and..." Jean Wan's expression turned colder. "Don't think too highly of yourself. I just happened to overhear their conversation and knew that they were up to no good. This is the Mo family home. If something filthy and disgusting really happened, Grandfather Mo will most likely be so angry that his illness will act up tomorrow. I can only blame myself for being stupid to care about such things." "Really?" The man still chuckled. Jean Wan didn't want to disturb him, but when she saw the small silver bag in Mo Pylon's hand, she felt that she had gone too far, so she rushed up to her. Now she regretted it very much, but even if she said those words, she was afraid that it would only make things worse. She was very vexed. She regretted that she had been so impulsive just now. After 3 years, had she forgotten what kind of person Immerse was? How could he be so easily tricked by her? However, what Uncle O told her kept reminding her of the scene where Elder Immerse broke his crutch on his back, which made her unable to lie down and rest peacefully. In short, she was really impulsive tonight. Jean Wan was depressed. The servant came quickly. In less than 3 or 4 minutes, the spare first aid kit of the Immerse family was sent over. Immerse opened the door to pick up the first aid kit. Every time Jean Wan was about to get out of bed, the man would throw 2 threatening words at her. Don't move. At this moment, he was taking medicine from the first aid kit. His eyes were calm and steady, and his expression was calm and indifferent, making it difficult to see through him. When he brought the medicine over, when Jean Wan looked at him with a guarded face, he motioned for her to raise her chin. Jean Wan looked at the closed door and hesitated before slowly raising her head. As soon as the disinfectant was rubbed on her neck, she trembled in pain but didn't make a sound. She even turned her face away and closed her eyes to avoid looking at the man who was applying medicine for her. Immerse glanced at her forbearing expression and didn't speak. His movements became lighter. When he applied medicine on her neck, he found that the wound might not be caused by fingernails. Thinking of the diamond rings that Immerse liked to wear on her hand, he knew the cause of the wound. If you hadn't hurt yourself, I might have appreciated your bravery tonight. Unfortunately, you are still brave and can't even protect yourself, the man commented sarcastically. Jean Wan, she was still upset that she shouldn't have come here tonight. At this moment, she was angry, but she didn't show it. Hearing this, she was about to push him away and stand up, when the man suddenly touched her ear. The vague pain and inexplicable sensitivity made her give a short, low cry. Just now, when Immerse pulled her hair, her nails had touched her ear. Although it didn't hurt, it must have been broken. What's your name? The man helped her apply medicine on the broken skin on her ear and said lightly in an emotionless tone, when I opened the door for Immerse Joshua, I smelled the smell you applied on her body. If you dare to call me that again, I'll see if I can bear it. Jean Wan. Chapter 506. The moment she fell on the bed, Jean Wan rushed to sit up. Immerse didn't do anything to her. He just put away the medicine in his hand. His shirt was still neatly on, indicating that he hadn't showered or slept so early. His temperament was cold and handsome, but she couldn't sense any lust from him. She had always known this man's calmness and self-control. Immerse had once used this method to make things happen between him and Inshuyen. At that time, he didn't seem to be shaken by lust, so the fragrance shouldn't be a problem. Putting the medicine box aside, Immerse seemed to finally find the time to look down at the woman sitting by the bed. As soon as their eyes met, Jean Wan's nerves tightened, but she still stood up. It's just a small wound. There's no need to do this. The medicine has been applied. I'm going back. He glanced at her barefoot on the ground, and his handsome face was unruffled. He said mildly, put on your shoes. The shoes are outside. Immerse signaled her to go to the temporary shoe rack in the room with his eyes. Jean Wan hesitated and walked over. She opened the door on the inside of the shoe rack and suddenly saw the pink slippers that she had only worn 2 or 3 times when she came to the Immerse family. She paused. Looking at the pair of shoes inside, it seemed that nothing had changed in the past 3 years. She opened her mouth. Immerse, I really want to know. Back then, you didn't want me anymore. Did you regret it later? She didn't know when, but the man had come behind her. He unhurriedly took out the pair of pink slippers and handed them to her. "What do you think?" Hearing these words, Jean Wan took the shoes and said mildly, "Maybe not, because I've never seen the word regret on you." The man glanced at the shoes on her feet. "Put them on. It's getting late. Go to sleep." His voice was gentle, as if the two of them were just chatting about a common, everyday topic. Jean Wan composed herself and turned to look at him. "When Grandfather Mo beat you, why did you? There's still some drug in my body. Are you sure you can withstand my loss of control? Continue to stand here, but I can't guarantee how long I can endure it." The man interrupted her. His tone remained the same, but his voice was deep and hoarse. Jean Wan's voice faltered. She abruptly opened the door and quickly walked out, not staying a moment longer. As the night grew darker, Jean Wan tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When she finally fell asleep, she suddenly received a call before 4 in the morning. When she saw that the caller ID was Yen Ji's number, she frowned. Why was this brat calling at this time? Jean Wan picked up the phone and put it to her ear, still lying on the bed, and answered the phone with her eyes closed. "What? Calling me at this hour? Are you sleepwalking?" "Sister Wan, I'm sorry to wake you up so late, but our SWAT team suddenly has an urgent mission and has recalled all our members. The Mo family is too far from the city, and we can't hail a taxi at this hour, so we might have to drive your car back." Yen Ji's voice was unusually stern. It sounded like he really had an urgent mission. Yen Gu did not have as much freedom as Feng Ling. After all, he belonged to the SWAT team. Even though he was by her side as a bodyguard, he still had to listen to his superior's orders. If there was any major case or mission that required manpower, he had to rush back at any time. "All right, then come to the villa I live in. I'll open the window and throw the car key down for you." "All right. Sorry to trouble you, Sister Wan." Jean Wan sat up and took out the car key from her bag. After waiting for a while, Yen Gu was already waiting downstairs. She pushed open the window and glanced at him. Usually, Yen Gu would laugh and laugh like a sunny boy by her side. She did not expect that when there was a mission in the team, his expression would be so stern. Jean Wan threw the key down. He raised his hand to express his gratitude. Jean Wan only waved her hand to ask him to hurry up and then turned back to bed to continue sleeping. It was not until 7:00 the next morning when Jean Wan woke up that she suddenly remembered that the car had been driven away by Yen Gu. How was she going to return? As expected, Jean Wan had to rush back to MN Group for work. Mo Jingshan was also preparing to return to the company because Elder Mo had been recovering well for the past 2 days. With Elder Mo around, Jean Wan had no choice but to take Mo Jingshan's car. The black ghost drove out of the Mo family home. Elder Mo kept smiling and waving from behind, telling Jean Wan to come back often to visit him. It was not until the car window was closed that Jean Wan restrained the smile on her face. She stared at the front of the car and did not look at the man who was driving. The atmosphere in the car was very quiet. However, during breakfast, Jean Wan could tell that the drug in Mo Jingshan's body was already gone. Right now, in the car, she could clearly feel the man's clear and faint scent. The car had just driven into High City's downtown area when they suddenly heard the sound of several police cars clamoring. Many of the surrounding cars were forced to stop, and many of the cars parked by the side of the road had been knocked askew. There seemed to be the smell of exhaust smoke in the air, as well as some kind of gunpowder smoke. When the car drove into this area, it saw the scattered police cars and armed police officers in the surroundings. Mo Jingshan slowed down the car and looked in that direction. It appeared that a fierce police chase had just happened here. There were several pools of blood on the ground. Jin-won also saw it. If it were in the past, seeing the blood on the ground and the armed police officers would definitely shock her. However, after experiencing life and death in Cambodia, she was no longer surprised by such things. She was only puzzled. Strictly speaking, last night, the SWAT team was on an urgent mission. Could it be this? Mo Jingshan had already driven the car to the nearest police car. The police stationed here would ask every passing car to stop and search. When he rolled down the car window, the police took a look at them and then at the situation in the car. As usual, he recorded the license plate number of the security car on the booklet in his hand and said, "If you want to go downtown, you'd better take a detour. The police are chasing a group of armed kidnappers." To ensure the safety of the nearby citizens, the roads ahead have been sealed off. "Can't we directly go to the West City District from here?" Jin-won asked. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."